meeting to order in accordance with the Open Public Meetings Act, PL 1975, Chapter 231. Adequate notice of this regular meeting of the Board of Adjustment of the Township of Franklin has been provided. Would you call the roll, please?
Laura Grauman asked to be excused. Donald Johnson. Bruce McCracken.
Here.
Alan Rich.
Here.
Robert Shepard asked to be excused. Anthony Caldwell.
Here.
Gary Rosenthal.
Here.
Joel Reese.
Here.
Cheryl Vigalo asked to be excused, and Chairman Thomas.
Here. Moving down to the hearings, Kathleen Kelly, ZBA 180015, hardship variance in which the applicant seeks to construct a covered porch in the front of the house, 65 Wilson Road, Somerset, Block 422, Lot 5 in the R20 zone. This is carried to December 6th. Notification is needed to the newspaper only. The first hearing we'll be having, Kings Row Homes, ZBA 16-00017. This is carried from October 4th with no notifications needed. Applicant is returning for site plan and subdivision approval with variances, requesting permission to construct 34 townhouse units consisting of 26 three-bedroom and 8 two-bedroom townhouses at 77 and 123 Cedar Grove Lane, Somerset, Block 468.07, lots 46 and 47 in the R40 zone. And ready? Sure?
I am. Can everyone hear me? Okay. Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the Franklin Township Zoning Board. My name is Jason Harlach from the law firm of Wisniewski and Associates. I represent the applicant Kings Row Homes, LLC. If you forgive me for sitting, I usually like to stand for everyone, but it's a little hard for me nowadays, so I'm just going to stay seated. I represent the applicant in this application. The application is known as the Grove at Somerset. Applicant is Kings Row Homes, LLC. The property, as the chairman stated, is located at 77-123 Cedar Grove Lane in the Township of Franklin, and is also known as Block 46807, lots 46 and 47. My client's project proposes to construct a 34-unit townhome community on the property consisting of 26 three-bedroom units and 8 two-bedroom units. Now, this property has a bit of a history, and this project has a bit of a history, so for some of the newer members or anyone who doesn't have quite the memory on this, I just could give a little bit of a background. This property is located in the R40 zone, and because of that, back in 2010, my client made an application for use and density, a bifurcated application for use and density variance to construct a townhome community on this property. That application ended up in litigation between the township and my client, and eventually that litigation settled. There was a settlement plan that was entered into between the township and my client on July 15th of 2013. As a result of that settlement plan, this board granted a resolution in October of 2017 granting use variance and density variances on the property to construct a 34-unit townhome community with 26 three-bedroom units and 8 two-bedroom units. Since that time, my client has been working with his professionals and the township professionals to modify the site plan to incorporate many suggestions from not only the township but the county and different state agencies that require different testing on the property, and we bring that site plan before you tonight. Just for the record, and I believe everyone has a copy of the settlement plan in their package, but section 1.3 of the settlement plan on page 3 states that the zoning board will retain jurisdiction of this matter to hear King Row's site plan application. That's why we're back here tonight. In considering King Row's site plan application, the zoning board shall accommodate and provide the necessary and appropriate relief by way of variance or waiver on those bulk and or site issues necessary to give full effect to the aforementioned grant of a use and density variance on the site. The attached concept plan, which has not been reviewed by township professionals, demonstrates conceptually a plan that reflects the use and density elements of the settlement. And that's why we're here, as I said, tonight. We come before you seeking preliminary and final major site plan approval, preliminary and final major subdivision approval, and the necessary waivers and variances for the site. So at the end of the hearing, I will come before you again and ask for those approvals. You will hear from our three main witnesses tonight, our project engineer, Scott Turner, our architect, Wayne Johnson, and our planner, Paul Phillips. For the purposes of jurisdiction, an affidavit of service was sent to the zoning board and to the zoning board attorney on September 28th, 2018, showing publication in the Courier News on September 24th of 2018. Additionally, on September 20th of 2018, notices were sent via certified and regular mail to all property owners within 200 feet of the property, to the Somerset County Planning Board, to the New Jersey Department of Transportation, the NJDEP, and all the necessary utility companies. As Mr. Chairman stated, this matter was originally scheduled to be heard on October 4th, 2018, and was carried to this evening without further notice. With that, I respectfully ask the Township to accept jurisdiction on this matter.
Yes.
Okay, so unless there are any questions from the board, before we begin, I can call my first witness.
Proceed.
Okay, Scott Turner. Yes, there
Yes.
is. And you need to, I've been instructed we need to sign the witness list. Okay.
If you could raise your right hand, I'll swear you in. You swear the testimony you're about to give should be the truth.
I do.
Thank you. Your name and address, please.
Scott Turner, Turner, and I'm with Menlo Engineering Associates, 261 Cleveland Avenue, Highland Park, New Jersey, 08904.
Mr. Turner, can you, for the record, can you please describe your experience and expertise as an engineer?
Sure. I've been in front of this board on a few occasions in the past. I am a graduate of the New Jersey Institute of Technology. I hold a Bachelor of Science degree in Civil Engineering.
Licensed in the state.
I am licensed in the state of New
Let's go.
Jersey as a professional engineer. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, Mr. Turner, before we begin, can you just give a brief background as to the present condition of the site?
Sure, yeah, and just very quickly, I am going to just for the record state again that the property is known as Block 468.07, lots 46 and 47, and it does contain 7.73 acres. It is in the R40 single-family residential zoning district. It has approximately 400 feet of frontage along Cedar Grove Lane, and it's about 850 feet deep. It is bounded by a variety of uses on all four sides actually. To the west, we're gonna just assume north is straight up for the purposes of this presentation. I'll make it a little easier. So to the west is an existing landscape supply company. I know it as the Janho site, and I'm sure you folks do as well. To the north is an existing single-family residential development. To the east is an existing place of worship, the Jain Center. And then across the street to the south is an existing retail strip center. And I think we should mark this exhibit that I'm presenting
Yeah, I
towards.
was just about to say, mark it as
A1.
We do that as A1?
Yeah, with today's date, please.
Okay, so the site itself is, for the most part, primarily undeveloped, mostly wooded, with the exception of a small area up front that has or contains a small house and a couple of ancillary structures and a driveway that leads out to Cedar Grove Lane. The site is, I would say, mildly sloped for the most part from the rear towards the front of the site. There's an existing Texas Eastern gas transmission line easement located at the rear of the property, and it actually clips the northeast corner of the property. Associated with that gas transmission easement, which is 60 foot wide, is a 100-foot gas transmission buffer requirement from Franklin Township. And that sort of limits us in terms of how far back we can go towards the rear of the property with development. The property is, as indicated to you here, for a 34-unit townhouse development, which will include 8 two-bedroom units. All of the end units will have 2-car garages and driveways. All the interior units will have a single-car garage and a driveway. All units will also have a private patio space in the rear of their units. There will be no basements. The soil conditions are not conducive to having basements. We had anticipated possibly doing crawl spaces rather than the basements or slab on grade, but again, the soil testing that was done really is going to prohibit that as well. So we're going to do townhomes that are going to be slab on grade condition. There are a total of 8 buildings with respect to this site plan. It's a mixture of 3, 4, and 5-unit buildings, and they're situated along 2 new roads. And the roads are labeled just for now as Road A and Road B. Road A is the main road that comes in off of Cedar Grove Lane. Its intersection is positioned all the way over as far east as we could get it on the property. Immediately at the intersection is a small landscaped median with a small identification sign for the development of 24 square feet. There'll be a brick sign approximately 6 foot by 4 feet in dimensions. The Road B is located further towards the back. Road A kind of meanders its way towards the rear of the property, then tees into Road B. Road B is a smaller road ending in a cul-de-sac that's on the westerly side of the site. Both roads will be 26 feet in width, will be curved with granite block curbing, and will have sidewalks on both sides of the street. We're also providing a total of 38 9-foot by 18 off-street parking spaces on the site, and there will be a total of parking spaces of 130 spaces provided on the property when you include the off-street parking, the garages, and the driveway spaces. And when you compare that to the requirement from the New Jersey Residential Site Improvement Standards of 81 spaces, we far exceed that standard. And I'll go as far to say as well is the minimum requirement of off-street parking spaces is 17 based on the number of units compared to the RSIS standards, and we're again far exceeding that. And that was one of the comments that we had been asked to accommodate during the staff reviews, is to provide some additional off-street parking, which we've done. All the roadway, geometry, curbing, driveways, sidewalks, parking comply with the RSIS standards. In the rear of the property, northwest corner is an emergency access easement that leads itself away from the cul-de-sac of Road B. And that heads in a northerly direction towards the northwest corner of the property, and then it leads out towards the northwest. It makes a left at the rear corner of the property and then heads westerly along the rear of the northerly lot of 49.02, which is our neighbor, the Janho property. That easement allows us to bring an emergency access driveway all the way out to New Brunswick Road. And in addition to emergency access, we're using that easement for utility services as well. There'll be a water main installed on that easement, as well as a sanitary sewer main to service this development. And those utilities have the potential to service any potential future development possibly down the road for the Janho site as well. Along the southwest corner of the site, down in the lower left corner near Cedar Grove Lane, we are also proposing a rather large easement, 20,844 square feet in size. And again, that was an easement that's reserved for future potential access, again, into the Janho property. It's been designed in area and size to accommodate a potential driveway connection out from Cedar Grove Lane to accommodate not only vehicular traffic, but also possibly loading traffic by tractor-trailer delivery vehicles and that sort of thing, if that ever became necessary. The driveway configuration is such, and the easement has been laid out such so that the driveway can line up with the existing driveway that's located directly across the street at the retail strip center. So that's the kind of how we set that easement up so that can all be aligned up properly and accommodate those movements. With respect to, is there any questions up to that point? I know it threw a lot of information out at this point. No? Okay. So we're going to move on to utilities again. Water, sewer, gas, electric, cable, telephone are all available to the site. They'll be brought into the site by way of underground services. Sanitary sewer will come from New Brunswick Road. Water will come from New Brunswick Road and Cedar Grove Lane. We're going to do a looped connection through the site to provide 2 feeds of water service into the property. And of course, gas and electric will be brought in as necessary into the site as well. Stormwater. Stormwater has been a bit of a thorn in my side for the past couple of years on this property. We've gone through extensive calculations, designs, revisions, modifications to bring the site into compliance with all the necessary standards that we have to abide by. In particularly, we have an enhanced stormwater management system requirement from the Delaware and Raritan Canal Commission because this site's drainage drains directly into the canal. With that said, there's enhanced water quality requirements that have to be met, as well as other items as well. So on the property, we have a conventional stormwater management system underneath the roads, inlets and pipes that collect the stormwater runoff, and they will convey their flow into the proposed wet pond that we have located in I'll call that the southwesterly portion of the site, sandwiched in between building number 1, which is located on Road A, and that existing easement that's on the southwest corner of the property. The wet pond has been designed to comply with all the necessary standards prior to discharge into the county drainage system. Prior to any discharge getting into that pond, we have 2 water quality treatment devices that will be installed on the pipes before they discharge into that pond, again, to further enhance the water quality treatment that's necessary. In addition to that, we have 3 infiltration areas on the property. They're not infiltration areas that you may be used to seeing in terms of a sand bottom infiltration basin. They're not meant for that. It's meant to handle a volume issue with DNR Canal Commission. Their requirement for this particular corridor is that we cannot increase the volume of runoff off the site when compared to the pre-development condition. And that becomes very difficult when you're looking at a site that's currently wooded and you're going into a site, any site that you're going to want to develop. Detaining and, peak rates of runoff are different than volumes of runoff. So the way to do that is to get extensive soil testing done, which we did. There had probably been 30 plus soil test pits done on the site throughout a number of different times of the year, which allowed us then to come up with a design for 3 infiltration basins, which will allow us to keep the volume of runoff on the site. And they're very small depressions in the ground. They're not really something that would be totally visible. They will be fenced with a 4-foot high post and rail fence to keep them safe. But the depressions are only anywhere between 1.5 feet and 2 foot in depth. They're not terribly deep. They're there just enough to get the volume that we need to keep on property and allow that water to absorb back into the ground. And that's soil conditions. In these 3 areas, we have one area behind building number 2, which is the middle building on the westerly side of Road A. And we have 2 others that are on the easterly side of the site behind buildings 7 and 8, which are the buildings on the easterly side of Road A. And then we have the last one, which is up in the northeasterly corner along the side of building number 6. And they're really, again, they're going to be topsoiled, they'll be grassed, so they won't be sand, and they'll be fenced in. And they're there for water quality standards. We've submitted all the calculations and all the necessary data to the Delaware Raritan Canal Commission, and they've approved the stormwater management design as you see here. The only thing they're waiting on at this point are municipal and county approvals before they'll grant the certification. And of course, everything before it gets discharged will go through an outlet control structure that's located on the wet pond itself, which ultimately discharges all of the runoff from the site by way of a pipe into the existing county drainage system, which the county has approved as well, other than a couple of technical details in terms of the construction of the outlet control structure. Okay. So all of, and in addition to that, we've also complied, obviously, with all the municipal and county requirements, and also we have a pending application with the NJDEP, which will be a further stormwater management review, which I am sure we're going to have no issue with that, given the requirements that we had to address with the DNR Canal Commission. So if there's no questions about utilities at this point? Okay. So recreation, there is a recreation component that we had to comply with respect to the application. The requirement is 400 square feet per unit, which is 13,600 square feet. We are providing 3 areas of recreation on the site, one of which is in the rear. The 2 areas are in the most northerly section of the property, one of which is a community garden. Community garden is something that we're seeing kind of more and more pop up on applications. I've seen them come up in the township that I live in Monroe. People seem to take a liking to them. It's not necessarily maybe the norm that everybody's used to seeing, but it's something that, you know, people in these types of developments kind of like and they use. And it'll have, right now we've got it set up with 16 community garden plots that could grow to 18 or 20 if it needed to, but it's in the rear. It'll be very attractive, and actually I have an exhibit that I can kind of show you what they may look like. I want to push the community garden. There should be one that. Thank you. We'll mark this as A2.
Yes, please.
So this is just a sample of what a community garden would typically look like. It's not necessarily exactly what this will look like here, but you can see the individual garden plots, and people get the chance to plot or you know, plant whatever they like and grow the vegetables and flowers, and it's just it's a nice feature to kind of bring people together. And you know, it's just one of those kind of maybe outside the box thinking a little bit more so than your general run-of-the-mill kind of recreation component. So we're going to go back to A1. To the right of the community garden plot, again, back in that northerly section, we thought it would be a good idea to introduce an open play area. So we have a 5,000 square foot open play area immediately next to that community garden plot that perhaps could be useful. If somebody's in there doing their garden, they can have an area for their kids to possibly play. That area will be outlined by way of some corner fencing to kind of delineate the limits. And we've got some benches that are spread, 2 or 3 benches that are spread throughout that area to allow people to sit down if they need to. The third area of recreation is down further south. It's in between buildings 2 and 3, sort of midway up Road A. On the westerly side of Road A, there's a walking path to a gazebo that will be located behind and in between the rears of buildings 2 and 3. And it's just a little area for walking, and people can go out there and congregate at that gazebo. And that's a total rough area of about 1,542 square feet. So when you add all 3 areas up, we have 13,921 square feet of recreation space, not including the sidewalks that are running along either side of the new roads, plus the sidewalk that we have installed or proposed to install along Cedar Grove Lane as well. So that's the recreation component that we're proposing for the development. We think we comply with the standard based on what we've proposed here. Lighting will be handled by LED lighting fixtures. We have LED single post-top fixtures. They're 12-foot mounting heights. They're designed to, of course, provide safe and adequate lighting levels. We have no spillage off property, and we believe the lighting complies with all the municipal standards. Landscaping, we have a comprehensive, I think a significant landscaping plan that we've submitted to the board. I'll just give you some quantities in terms of plant materials here. We have 106 deciduous trees, 273 evergreen trees, 36 flowering trees, 231 shrub plantings, and 76 ground cover plantings. And those are, of course, a mixture, and they're planted throughout the property. We have the street trees along the new roadways, street trees along Cedar Grove Lane. We have landscaping that will be around the perimeter of the wet pond, which will be bounded by a modular block retaining wall with a fence on top of that. And then we have a lot of buffer plantings, especially along the westerly side of the property next to the landscape nursery. We have a heavy buffer. We've also supplemented that buffer with a proposed 8-foot-high board-on-board fence that runs from Cedar Grove Lane all the way to the rear to provide further screening. And then we've provided another row of buffer plantings on the easterly side from the Jane Center. That's sort of sitting in between those slender, long, kind of elongated infiltration areas and our property line. We are providing a number of plant materials and buffer plantings in there as well. And then, of course, in the rear, where we have the single-family homes to the north, there is already some existing mature trees that are on those properties that, of course, will remain. But we've supplemented that area with some additional buffer plantings. We have a small berm that we've graded in that area. We've got to be a little careful. We're kind of squeezed for a little, for some space only because of that gas transmission easement. We can't do anything really in there. So we've put in as much plant material that we think we can that will allow it to remain healthy as it continues to grow throughout the years. And that we believe will provide us with a very significant landscape plan as it grows and matures throughout the years to provide a very nice community here. We are, of course, removing a significant number of trees. There's no denying that. The vast majority of the trees will be removed. It's a byproduct of the site and what we need to do to get the site to be engineered in a safe manner. We are going to save some trees in the proposed easement in the southeast corner of the property out by Cedar Grove Lane. We really aren't doing a whole lot of work in that area, but we will be supplementing that with additional plantings. And then we're also saving some row in a bit of trees. You know, I think there's maybe 20 trees, as Mr. Healy pointed out in his staff report, along the easterly property line as well. And again, they'll remain, and we'll supplement that with the new buffer plantings. So one of the concerns I am sure of this board, and we've heard it in the past, is, you know, what's this development going to look like from Cedar Lane and possibly from the rear property? So our client retained a rendering company to do some photorealistic renderings to show the board and the professionals what this site will look like at time of planting and then at the 10-year growth rate. Jason, this is Cedar Grove Lane initial growth exhibit.
A3.
Okay, so this is a photorealistic representation taken at a 5-foot eye height, taking with a 43 millimeter lens, which is, you know, as close as you can get to representing, you know, an eye's cone of vision in terms of what you would see. And actually, I'm going to just very quickly go back to A1. It may be a little hard to see, but that view is taken sort of sitting in Cedar Grove Lane, as if you were driving along Cedar Grove Lane, sort of in the middle of where the dry detention basin is along the Jane Center, and looking in on an angle towards the site, in towards buildings 8 and 1. And at initial planting growth, that's what you would expect to see. This end unit here is building 8, and the filtered view here is building number 1. One thing, again, I will point out, and I'm going to go back to A1 again very quickly, is none of these buildings are running parallel with Cedar Grove Lane at this point. We've located these buildings now in such a fashion so that we're really minimizing the impact, in my opinion, to the view shed of Cedar Grove Lane. You really just see the ends of these units, and they're not running perpendicular. They're running on an angle. They're all angled and skewed in different directions to kind of, to kind of help with that vision. So that's the view as planted. And you can see these smaller plant materials here. These are all of the as planted at initial growth. And then these are the more mature plantings that are currently there that will remain, that are located already on the Jane Center property along the perimeter. We're going to go to the 10-year exhibit, Jason. This will be A4. Okay, same view, same location, same height, same lens. This is the 10-year growth. You can see how quickly those have grown. We've taken a very conservative growth rate. We're not showing anything in here that's crazy. And you can see how filtered the view has become from Cedar Grove Lane to the ends of those units that are closest to Cedar Grove Lane. And again, I'll just jump again to, actually I'm going to jump to A3. And actually I'll show you both side by side. You can see what happens in 10 years at that conservative growth rate, how much filtered that view gets from point A to point B. And I failed to mention before, and I'm jumping back to A1, all of these units are, the closest unit to Cedar Grove Lane is 165 feet from the right-of-way of Cedar Grove Lane. So none of them are terribly close. The first thing you'll see in between the very first building, building number 1, and the right-of-way line is the wet pond and the landscaping around that wet pond. I think it's very similar, I wrote it down because I wouldn't remember it, to the Cedar Manor development that's at the corner of Cedar Grove and it's the corner of, Pierce and Cedar Grove Lane. It looks like it's a more recent development there. Kind of the same thing. There's a wet pond with a large modular block retaining wall, and then behind that you see sort of the units behind. So that's kind of somewhat similar of what we did here.
Excuse me.
Sure.
Did you do any simulations coming from the other direction?
We did not do any simulations coming from the other direction, no.
The reason I ask is because I'm very interested in the effect of the 20,000 square foot driveway easement on the view. Because that's one of the more wooded portions of the property.
Sure.
And I would think that even the people living in the townhouses looking out toward the street would appreciate that view with the detention pond in front of it.
Right. Well, the easement area that you're speaking of is, for the most part, going to remain untouched. Whatever trees are there are going to be there.
Well, yeah, but it's being reserved for a potential.
It is reserved, yes, absolutely, and it could go away, and then, when that application comes in. And I will tell you, though, that whole area, though, will not be taken up with pavement. The area is there, it's a big corner, but the reality is, and I think if you look at one of the plans, and I can tell you which one, we actually have dashed in what I think would be the driveway in that easement. It really does kind of hug this outer limit, and then this corner, the very southwest corner of that easement, doesn't need to be paved. There's no reason for it to be paved. It can remain as an open area. It can be certainly replanted. It may even be able to be maintained in its existing condition. There will be a large corner there, in my opinion, that really wouldn't have to be touched or could be replanted with additional buffer planting. So as you're coming down, heading in the other direction from New Brunswick Road towards the development, and you're looking towards the site, and you're going to kind of see building number 1, even when that roadway is in there, you could still have a fairly substantial stand of trees between that new driveway that could potentially get in there.
I get concerned when you say could still have. I'd like later on maybe we can firm up that nothing in the area you're talking about should even be touched, let alone have to be maybe supplemented, but let alone have to be replaced. Because what's there is there, and then we don't have to deal with could.
Sure, and I think that could be, should be a condition set upon the next applicant that might come in that would need to use that easement.
Well,
right now, we have we could set that up as a condition. We're not going to touch it. We're not going to.
Maybe we need to discuss that concept for a minute, actually. I've been sitting here since 1994, 93. We've never, ever, in this board or the planning board, dedicated a driveway for someone else's property for an application that doesn't exist. So I want to get it right. And one of the things I'm a little concerned that it has to be, we don't know that it has to be big enough to accommodate trucks. I have real concerns with trucks mixing across the corner of what to me so far is a very excellent site plan. You know, and if we're going to speculate about development, we can speculate a little more and say that if development occurs on that adjoining property, the intersection is going to be moved. There'll be a new part of New Brunswick Road constructed. There's about 1,000 feet of frontage on New Brunswick Road. There's all kinds of opportunities for access with all kinds of vehicular traffic. And again, I have concerns because I understand we can't say no to that. It's going to be there. But I think what I would like to say is that that driveway never be constructed, nothing be touched in the easement until there's an approved application on the adjoining property. That way, it will have come before this board or another board and been totally, completely vetted so that we have an obligation to protect this development, Kings Row, right? And we have an obligation to get the best site plan possible on the other property. So,
Mr. Chairman, I can speak to that a little bit if you don't mind. This wasn't our original idea, as you may know. This is actually floated to us at first by the county. The county had asked us, because of their concerns about the intersection, to try to get to see if we can work something out to this extent. So that's where it first kind of came from. The easement that we have with Mr. Janho, who is here, we worked on for a very long time, and part of the easement agreement does say that we're not making any assurances that there's going to be a driveway there. We're just reserving it, that he does have to come back before the board to get whatever approvals the board requires, and he has to come.
That's good, because sometimes having an easement like this in an approved application or site plan, some people might take that to mean that we've already tentatively approved another application or development. And what has to be clear is that the county is enforcing this. We know nothing about anything that's going on anywhere.
Exactly. If that site's going to be developed, obviously that area is going to be part of that site plan application. And if it's going to be residential, then obviously there won't be any trucks. If it's going to be commercial, he would have to make that pitch at that time. And we just wanted to leave the area big enough so as not to cut off his application in the future, whatever he decided to do.
I understand, and you're not going to use it, even if it's never used as a driveway, you're not going to use it, but I would like to formally put the condition in that it never be touched, no construction on any driveway can take place until there's an approved application on the adjoining property.
100%, and
I think that protects Kings Row a little bit.
100%, as the easement's written, we can't touch it because it's reserved, and they can't build upon it until they have their approvals. So what you're saying is already written into the easement, so we're fine with that.
Okay, I just want to make it crystal clear. There's no shades of gray here.
100% understood.
We
Mr.
get
Chairman?
to vet an application.
If I could just clarify too, sorry to cut you off, but it's just to clarify too, we do not have an application for the
Right.
Janho property. I mean, I've heard some rumors that people think there is one. There is not. We do not have an application. So this is the county looking, ahead and anticipating that if the Janho site ever was to come in for some type of redevelopment, they would like the entrance for that site to be as far away from the intersection as possible. So they've imposed this on this applicant to provide this easement in the possibility that the Janho site is imposed in the future. And the intent of this easement is exactly that, is not to allow the existing Janho site to all of a sudden put their driveway, move it over. They, by law, would have to come to one board or the other for a site plan approval, but it can hurt to put that in the
Just as
in
long
the
as that's
resolution.
all clearly understood. I think that's the most fair resolution for all the applicants and for the township,
Definitely.
right?
We agree.
I'm not-
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Okay, if we can move on, I'm going to show you some views from the rear of the property as well. So we're going to go to, this is the rear initial growth exhibit.
Yes.
Okay, and this is
I think we're up to A5.
A5, yes. Okay, this is the rear initial growth exhibit, and again, I'm going to go back to A1 just for point of reference. This is as if you were to be standing somewhere around what is lot, get my glasses for that, I can't see it. Yeah, lot 18 at the, in the northerly portion of the site. It's one of the existing single-family homes. That's one of the closest to this residential development. And that's if you were looking, again, standing at 5 foot high, same lens, same everything. And that's what you would see at initial growth as if you were looking at the rear of the building. Because these buildings are more parallel in the rear, you will see the rears of those buildings, but again, these are residential to residential units. There is a substantial distance between the two as a byproduct of the existing gas transmission line that's there. And then on top of that, the 100-foot buffer, which limits where we can place the rear of our buildings. And our buildings in the rear, building number 6, which is on the northerly side of Road B, and it's the most easterly building, is 130 feet from the rear property line. Building number 5 is 107 feet from the rear property line, and that's the westerly building that's on that northerly side of Road B. So you can see all the new plant materials that are placed on the newly constructed berm in the rear of the property, and then the more mature trees that are sitting on the existing home lots. That view in 10 years becomes that view, and I'll mark this as A6. And you could see how substantially that buffer has grown in and how much more filtered that view is taken from the same viewpoint. And you can, see a little bit of the rears of those buildings, but it's very filtered at that point. And again, we are talking about a residential to residential buffer, and in between the backs of those homes is the rec space that we are providing on the site. So that's the scope of the views we've provided in terms of the landscaping. And of course, with the tree removal, just to kind of close up, we are going to satisfy the tree replacement obligations on the property by way of the plant materials that we are providing, and then the monetary contribution that's required to satisfy that. We're not looking for any relief from that requirement. So I'll move on if we're okay, or do we have any questions?
Just a quick one. I remember from the previous hearings. Are these rental units or condo units?
They're townhomes.
But they're owned by
Owners, yes. There'll be fee simple lots, yes. Okay, so with respect to the zoning, we'll finish up with the zoning. We again are in this R40 zoning district. We do comply with all the bulk standards for that district, with the exception of maximum building coverage and maximum impervious coverage. And actually, we'll go back to A1 for this. The maximum building coverage permitted in the zone is 10%. This plan provides for a 14.1% building coverage. The maximum impervious coverage permitted in the zone is 20%, and we are providing 35%. This is a single-family residential zoning district, so it's, not exactly comparing this particular use to maybe the proper zoning standards. But when you look in the zoning ordinance and you take a look at, a townhouse, a permitted townhouse use zone, their building coverage permitted is 20%, and their impervious coverage is 40%. So we are well under or well below what would be permitted if we were in a townhouse zone. We understand we're not, we need the variances, but just for informational purposes. And the coverages have to do, some of it is a byproduct of some of the requirements that we had to address when we were meeting with staff and the fire official and going through this whole process with respect to the wider roadways. These roads are now 26 foot wide as opposed to the minimum that we could build at, which would be 24 feet in accordance with RSIS standards. So that had certainly an impact on coverage. We went from all single-car garages to having the end units having two-car garages, which just, makes for a nicer product for somebody that's living there. So that increased the coverages. We provided the sidewalks on all sides of the street, and we've, of course, got the added off-street parking to accommodate some concerns about having enough parking on the site compared to what we could have came in with in terms of the minimum requirements. So, those things, and actually I will also point out the paved emergency access road in the rear also had an impact on the impervious coverage. We had originally thought that would be done with some type of other coverage that might go out to the Cedar Grove Lane. That just wasn't something that the fire official was comfortable with. He wanted it to be a paved roadway, so that's now been added to the plan. And the cul-de-sac actually is a little bit bigger than what we would have normally designed for RSIS standards. And again, it was done to the geometry we were given by the fire official to accommodate his fire trucks. And we've done all that, and that's the reason. And in my opinion, from an engineering point of view, there's no substantial detriment to the public good in terms of these variance conditions. We're talking about a 14% building coverage and a 35% impervious coverage. It's been designed to comply, to be safe. The circulation is adequate and safe, and all of the stormwater management's been designed to comply with all the necessary standards. So I believe this board could grant those variances.
If I could speak to that briefly, I think perhaps more, you had compared the coverages to the R40. At the time of the use variance, there was a concept plan, and I believe the settlement agreement incorporated that concept plan. And that plan had building coverage of 11.5 as opposed to the 10, that's the R40, and an impervious coverage of 30.5. So what I would suggest, and particularly I think the planner should speak to, and you've already spoken to from an engineering perspective, the reason for the increases, but in my opinion, I think really the difference that the board should be considering tonight is the increase from 11.5 to 14.1 and 30.5 up to 35%. That's it.
Okay,
I'm sorry,
that's okay.
if we're going to consider that with impervious coverage, do we have, does this include a built driveway in that easement or not include? And if it doesn't, how much of a significant effect is that?
Yeah, that's a good question, Mr. Chairman, and we did not include that number in our coverage because we honestly are not sure what that's going to look like. So we did not include that in our coverage calculation.
We don't know if that does come to fruition, would it remain an easement? Might there be a subdivision and it might become part of the other site? It's so speculative, it's hard to even say how to treat that issue.
That's the issue. We couldn't calculate something we don't know what's going to look like or what's going to be used for, and who's going to technically own it at the end of the day.
No, I understand your position. At the same time, if we're going to discuss impervious coverage and there is a 5% difference from one to the other, this will add something to it.
Well, I'll tell you, Mr. Chairman, what I'll do is when we get another professional up here, I'll go calculate what I think, again, based on what I can best take a guess at, what that additional coverage would include. And at least you'll have an idea in terms of how much additional impervious coverage that may add to the plan.
Do we throw this out for food for thought? Is it worth him doing that, or is it worth us saying that if the driveway is built, that easement be subdivided and be part of the other property, so it becomes that impervious coverage becomes their problem, and this property actually stays the same?
I think probably the best, I think that information might be useful. I think if you know, I'll make this up, that it makes it go from 35 to 37%.
That may not be.
You may, at the end of the day, decide that you want to grant that variance to 37 with that additional 2% being for that.
Okay.
Not for anything else, but just to
and-
allow for that in case it does happen, then the future, could be 10 years from now, it's a homeowners association, they have this zoning problem that at least it's there and on the record.
Yeah, in fact, if the board does not do that tonight, and you approve, let's say, 35%, and eventually that driveway is installed, and it's another 2%, it's quite likely this applicant would have to come back to this board to get another variance for that 2%.
Yes,
Yeah,
if it's
or-
part of that site.
It would have to, or be part of that application together, like a joint application with DeGenos.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, just to speak to what you were talking about a little bit about having it subdivided, the only issue I can, one of the issues I can see with that is obviously with the financing on the site, and my client doesn't get to really make the call on that, and we'd have to get, all sort of bank approval and lender approval when the time comes, because just giving, an easement's one thing, subdivision is something else, so that'd be tough.
I just want it done the right way, so you tell us the right way.
Understood.
Do it,
I
and
think during the next testimony, Mr. Turner could probably calculate that number, so we can at least have a good faith estimate as to what we're looking at.
Okay, the last variance with respect to the site plan is the private roads. The township, again, requires 30-foot wide private roads. This road is proposed at 26 feet wide. Again, that exceeds the RSIS standards of 24 feet, and it was a byproduct of our conversations and requirements given to us by the township fire official. So again, I don't believe there's any substantial detriment to the public good in granting that variance. It's a little bit wider than what we would normally design to for a development like this, and it complies, it makes it more safer in the minds of the fire official. Okay, the last thing I have is with respect to the zoning, the subdivision. These are set up to be fee simple lots. This will be a 36 lot subdivision in essence, which would be
34.
There's 34 lots, individual lots, but then there are 2 additional lots being created. One for the private roads, because these are all privately owned and maintained roads. So there'll be a new road created for Road A and Road B, and then there will be another lot created for the open space, all the open space around the perimeters of the property. And that open space is about 4.6 acres. So there will be 36 new lots created, and the fee simple is to allow each individual homeowner to own the land that's underneath their unit. The subdivision's been set up so that the subdivision, the lot itself, encompasses the porches and the service walk, so they all sit inside their individual lot, so they're not overlapping into the lots that would be owned and maintained by the homeowners association. There are a number of variances, which is very typical with respect to a subdivision like this, and it's from section 112. 49F, which requires these individual lots to have front and rear setbacks of 20 feet and a side setback at 20 feet at each building end. If you look at Mr. Healy's staff report of September 6, 2018, on page 4, number 3, he goes through building by building and very detailed outlines the required variances. I can regurgitate that if you'd like me to, but it's all
Please
kind
don't.
of spelled out. And if it could be made, if this board decides to vote favorably on the application, perhaps it could be just, brought into that resolution, but I'll do however you like it. I can regurgitate this to get it on the record.
It's part of the record.
Great. Thank you,
It's
Mr.
in their
Healy.
agenda. And I just speak to this briefly, just so it's clear to the board and the public. These are not setbacks to the perimeter of the property.
Right.
These are the individual lots within which each of the townhomes will sit, and the zoning requirement, there's certain setbacks for those individual little lots. So that's, I just wanted to make that clear. And Cedar Manor, just down the road, had a very similar type situation where they needed 60 technical variances because, they didn't comply with these little setback requirements for the fee simple lots.
Okay, that's my direct testimony, unless I missed something that you need me to add, but we can go through
Just-
staff reports if you'd like.
Just one thing before staff reports. Garbage.
Thank you very much. I did. As you're looking at me, I knew that's what you were going to say. So garbage and recycling here on this development will be by way of curbside pickup. There's no dumpsters proposed on the property. The cans will be stored inside the garages. The garages have been designed to be oversized to accommodate the cans that are going to be on site. So they'll be stored inside the garages, pulled out during regular pickup days.
Do all the units have garages?
All the units have garages. The end units have 2-car garages and driveways, and all the interior units have 1-car garages and driveways.
So how do you regulate that, whether people store their garbage inside in the garage or not?
I think it will be a byproduct of probably the homeowners association guidelines. When they purchase a unit, they'll be in there, I would imagine. It's a little bit beyond my.
Exactly. Yeah, there'll be bylaws in a homeowners association that has to be constructed as a result of this, and it'll be in there.
Okay, any board questions?
Yeah, electric cars. How do you go, let's say everybody buys an electric car and they're in the garages. Is there plug-ins for, can that be accommodated?
Yeah, I've never been asked that before. Well, that's a good question. The answer is no, it's not accommodated now on the site
If
plans.
it's a single-family house, you just have a garage.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if those electric cars can just be plugged into an outlet. I don't know how they work, to be honest with you. The architect will be here he'll do some testimony in regards to the electrical opportunities inside the garage. Perhaps that can be accommodated. I just don't know. I'm sorry.
Well, the applicant and the developer are here, so they might want to think about that in the marketing of the units.
I know in North Brunswick, they're just working on an ordinance for that.
Okay, all right, I can see that coming, sure.
In the main, around the, I guess it's called Main Street,
Okay,
all of us.
Yeah.
I just talked. The architect can testify about that.
Uh-huh,
So he's up next, so he'll talk directly about that.
yeah,
Okay, you only have 2 more witnesses, right?
I do. I just want to make sure that Mr. Turner hits on the staff reports just to make sure.
I can quickly go
Okay.
through staff if you'd like, or we can wait.
And typically, it's if there are any issues that you cannot comply with.
Exactly. I just want to
Right.
get that on the record. Mr. Turner, have you had an opportunity to review the September 25th, 2018 report of CME Associates?
Yes.
Okay. Are there any items in that letter that cannot be complied with?
No, we'll comply with those requirements and work with their staff.
Okay. I know you've touched on many of the issues of Mr. Healy's letter. Do you have anything else to add with respect to that?
No, I don't, unless there's some additional testimony that's required. I'm sure you'll hear more testimony to address some of the other comments, but I don't believe there's anything else there that I missed.
And then there are several other reports from different staff and departments in the township. Are there any issues that we need to address with any of those letters?
No, I have a fire prevention letter of September 28th that indicates no additional comments. I have a letter from the Traffic Safety Bureau of September 18, 2018, no additional comments. We have a letter from the County of Somerset Department of Health and Public Safety, September 17th, 2018, no additional comments. And then we have one from the Department of Public Works. There's no additional comments, dated October 1st, 2018. We have a letter from the Environmental Commission that came in an email. There's no date on it. They had two comments. One is impervious surfaces should be changed to pervious asphalt in the parking areas, and then tree removal appears to be excessive. I think I provided enough testimony in terms of the trees. And I will tell you that pervious porous pavement in this particular area just won't work. The soil conditions are not conducive to those types of materials, so we wouldn't suggest using those here at this development. And then the last one is from Franklin Township Sewage Authority, which is September 25th, 2018, and we agreed to their requirements as well.
Any
Okay.
questions, Mr. Turner?
No other questions. We'll continue with your witnesses. Since there are only three, we'll open the public at the end.
So at this time, call Mr. Wayne Johnson, the architect.
Holding the microphone in your left hand, could you raise your right hand? Where the testimony you're about to give should be the truth.
I do.
Your name and address, please.
Wayne Johnson. I'm with Blue Line Architecture at 397 Franklin Avenue, Wyckoff, New Jersey, 07481.
Might have to speak closer to the.
They're close like that? Okay. Thank you very much.
Mr. Johnson, can you please describe your experience and expertise as an architect?
Yes, I've been licensed since 1981, practicing in the state of New Jersey. Worked all sorts of commercial and residential properties, including townhomes such as these.
You can move on. He's licensed.
Thank you.
Thank you. And did you prepare the architectural plans for this site?
Yes, I did.
Do you have,
Yes, I have boards over here too. We can set up.
do the board so we can mark them, and
Yes.
I'll put them on the screen. You just let me know which ones.
What I'd like to do is go through the exhibits that the board has that we've submitted from the architect's office.
Mr. Johnson, do you know which on the screen, which one I'm?
It would be 17540 Rev PB up about the fifth line down, right
one?
there. That's it.
Do you have a board understand? We can mark that. Are we up to?
Well, if it's part of the package that was submitted to the board, we
You're
don't
right.
need to mark it
Correct.
separately.
Yes, we have two. We have about 4 other exhibits that we will mark.
Okay. Can you please
this
describe
is-
what's on the plan?
This is earmarked as drawing A1. What you see is the initial submission that was made to the planning board or Board of Adjustment. This is the front facade of the 5-unit complex, if you will. It represents different exterior materials. In this particular case, we have brick and vinyl siding and asphalt roofs. This has been revamped from the initial submission that we've made. We've added in to add a little bit of interest to the buildings and break up the what might be termed as monotony of a roof by adding dormers, 3 dormers in this particular case for the 5-unit. If I can, I'll move on to the next. A2 represents the floor plans of a 5-unit complex. Now, the the entire community is set up with three different types of units. We call them Unit A, B, C, and those are intermixed in these different configurations to form some interplay on the different clusters. In this case, it's a 5-bedroom unit. It incorporates an A, B, C, and a B and an A unit. The A units being the end units with 2-car garages. The middle units are all 1-car garages. The square footage are really reasonably similar. The type A units are 2,073 square feet. Our type B middle units are 2,154 square feet. Both those A and B units are 3-bedroom units. And our type C, which is a middle unit, is a 2-bedroom unit at 2,039 square feet. And we were asked by the board to show all the different clusters, and this particular cluster is the 4-bedroom cluster. It's comprised of two A end units and a C and a B middle unit. And again, the square footage is being the same for those different configurations. The material is similar. It's broken up. Again, it's broken up in different ways for how these units are put together. A4 is a 3-bedroom complex, if you will. It's comprised of two A units, which are 3-bedroom units, and a center middle unit to be the C unit. And again, a little bit breakup in how the facade looks. And we were asked to show the exterior rear view of a 5-bedroom unit or complex, and that's what this demonstrates here. There was the previous exhibits showed that also in a rendering form. And what you see above this is the side view of each one of the clusters. The opposite side being just a mirror image of what you're seeing here. Now, if I may, we have since taken a very close look at what we had originally submitted, and we took some marketing direction and influence and did some revamping to what the exterior is. What I'd like to do is mark this one as an exhibit.
That would be A7.
Mr. Johnson, is this on the slides at all so I can
Yes, it is.
tell me which one it is, if you don't mind? I don't want to guess and start opening. No, it's okay.
It would be one of the Schneiders. Schneider. If you would, to go to the next slide.
Yeah. That appears to be it.
That is it. Thank you. What you're seeing is a front side view of a typical 4-unit cluster. We've taken great efforts to trim it in such a way that it has some significant character. It is asphalt roofs. You can't see it quite well on this particular view, but there's also a dormer on this particular unit complex. We have side entrance porches. Each side unit, end unit has a side entrance, pathways leading to it with a covered portico. The interior units have porches, overhangs at the entrance. We've played with the color on this pretty carefully. We've eliminated the brick, which is a little more of an outdated material today. Someday it'll come back. But we're using a stone product at the base as a water table on the front and sides of the clusters. You can go to the previous slide.
That'll be A8.
That's A8. This is a full front face of the four-unit cluster. Again, you're seeing now you can see the dormers start to pop out on the roof. It adds a little character to the front of the units. We have some good overhangs to bring some good shadow lines onto the face of the buildings. Again, a good contrasting white trim to the gray tone for the vinyl siding. And you can see now the Belgian block curbing that we demonstrated here along the street, what we're calling the street. The next exhibit, this is A9.
Yes.
We did some color work to break up the different clusters in different ways, so that it does certainly break up the community to add some color to the area. Yet it kind of keeps as a uniform look to the building at the same time. In a way, it almost looks like a larger, almost luxury home. I'd like to look at it that way in terms of how its form and character starts to take shape. Again, the Belgian block curbs, paved streets, of course, and the landscaping done very simply for the sake of the view of this particular units. And that's a front view of the cluster. A9? A9?
A10.
A10, thank you. It's the same, looking at the same unit, it's a four-unit cluster with the same color, just giving you a different idea of the form. And if I can compare that to the other, put them side by side, which I really can't. But this is the effect of the cluster. I like to say they're not cheaply done. I think they're done in a way that it breaks it apart from looking as a kind of substandard community. I think we did what we could to make it step it up a little bit. Any questions at all?
Mr. Johnson, just if we can just touch upon the electric car question from Mr. McCracken from before.
Yes, indeed. That's something we would look to offer as an option for someone coming in to purchase a unit. It's certainly available to do that.
I think there's a high speed and a 120.
Whatever the homeowner is looking for, we'll give it.
220.
That's right, and we can give it to them. The bottom line is we can give it to them, but it's
I
their.
was told that when they build it, it's much cheaper to put in whatever, you know, if they're going to a high-speed 220,
Well, more than likely, the box is in the garage.
yeah.
The service panel's in the garage. And the panel to connect, to put an outlet in there is very, very easy to do, even if it's after the fact, after a unit's sold and flipped over. It's something that can be easily added into the unit.
Okay.
Any questions for Mr. Johnson? There are no questions. Call our planner, Paul Phillips.
You swear that the testimony you're about to give shall be the truth?
I do.
Your name and address, please.
Paul Phillips, Phillips. Firm is Phillips Price, 33-41 Newark Street, Hoboken, New Jersey.
Mr. Phillips, for the record, can you please describe your expertise and experience as a planner?
Yes, I'm a licensed professional planner, have been so licensed for over 30 years, and I've previously been before this board.
Mr. Phillips, do you have a opinion on this property as a planner?
Yeah, so from a planning standpoint, I think the heavy lifting with regard to this application has been done. The use variance is already in place for this property, and that is for the development of 34 townhouse units. In connection with the site plan application, the applicant is seeking what I would characterize as several relatively minor variances. They were already addressed actually to a large extent by Mr. Turner, so I'll try and be brief and basically put my planning spin and satisfaction of proof requirements. First, as you heard, both lot and building coverage variances are required. This was also the case, as Mr. Healy pointed out, at the time of the use variance concept plan. It's certainly no surprise here. The requirement of building coverage 10%, impervious of 20% is associated with the underlying R40 zoning, which, as you know, is a single-family zoning on 40,000 square foot lots. I think these variances are clearly subsumed within the D variances for use and density in accordance with the New Jersey Supreme Court decision in the Price versus Himeji case. Mr. Healy correctly pointed out in his report and also in his testimony this evening that the building and impervious coverages have increased somewhat vis-a-vis the use variance concept plan, and I think you heard from Mr. Turner as to the major reasons that's the case. And again, increase in the roadway width, increase in the number of garages. We now have 2-car garages for the N units, and there's quite a few N units because the number of units per structure isn't that great based on the plan. I think he mentioned the additional sidewalks, emergency access. I mean, these are sort of the principal reasons why the coverages went up, and principally the impervious coverage, which went up relatively a greater amount. Would also just kind of concur with Mr. Turner that we're now at 14% building coverage and 35% impervious. I think they're well within what can be considered reasonable for a townhouse development of this prototype and density. And I think he gave the example of your CR district, which I think still allows townhouses where the ordinance allows as much as 20% building and 40% impervious. So applicant is well within these thresholds. I'd also like to point out, I went back and read I think this is important, I went back and read the settlement agreement. And the settlement agreement, I think, recognized two things, which I think are important in terms of these variances. Number one, that the use variance plan was conceptual in nature. And number two, it stated the following. I'm just going to quote what's in the document. It says, in considering King Road's site plan application, the zoning board shall accommodate and provide the necessary and appropriate relief by way of variance or waiver on those bulk and/or site issues necessary to give full effect to the aforementioned grant of a use and density variance on this site. I think Mr. Turner outlined the reasons, again, why the coverages have increased relative to the conceptual use variance plan, and I believe they sort of legitimately fulfill the directive which is in the settlement agreement.
Mr. Phillips, not to cut you off, but just so we stay on this topic, I don't know if the board wants Mr. Turner just to put on the record he did a calculation. That way you can testify about that number. So if I can call him up for 5 seconds so he can put that number on the record.
So the added impervious coverage for that roadway, it approximates to 37.3% total impervious coverage for the property. My recommendation is to permit a 38% impervious coverage to give us a little wiggle room so we don't get into trouble later on. That would allow us to add approximately 10,000 square feet of additional impervious coverage should that driveway ever get built. And I would be comfortable with that number. We could accommodate that driveway in the future.
And just for the record, when you say that driveway, you mean the potential driveway built that could be built in the easement area in the southwest portion.
Southwest corner, yes. I'm sorry, southwest corner of the property, yes.
The second variance, I think, is really technical in nature, and I think Mark kind of basically gave the rationale. It has to do with the fact that the ordinance requires that the individual townhouse lots meet specific front, side, and rear yard setback requirements. And a number of the lots, and I'm not going to go through them all either, but a number of the lots don't meet the side and rear setbacks. I think the ordinance sort of contemplates a different ownership prototype, which assumes sort of larger fee simple townhouse lots than is proposed by the applicant. The applicant's proposing fee simple but smaller lots, in other words, smaller area. Devoted to the individual owner, and more of the land is then ascribed to the common area of the homeowners association. And this is not, I think, as Mark pointed out with the comparable development in this municipality, not atypical in my experience for many, if not most, of the developments in sort of today's environment. I see no impacts whatsoever if this variance is granted. I think, if anything, it's a C2 type variance in that the smaller lot devoted to the homeowner and the greater common open space is a positive, and I think it's consistent with sort of current development trends. The last variance is for the width of the road, and you heard from Mr. Turner, 30 feet is required. The applicant seeking 26 feet. This, I think, is a C2 variance as well. Not only does the 26-foot width actually exceed the RSIS requirements, but it has been vetted by your fire department as being acceptable. And I think the benefit here is the reduced roadway width means the applicant can provide more open space on the site, which would be not only in furtherance of master plan goals, but express purposes of the municipal land use law. And just lastly, I think that's the variances. Lastly, since the MLUL requires that an applicant satisfy the negative criteria at the site plan stage of an approved bifurcated use variance application, it would be my opinion, I believe, that this particular site plan certainly can be approved without causing substantial detriment to the public good or substantial impairment of the zone plan or zoning ordinance.
Just one question, just to close the loop. Mr. Turner testified to a slight increase on the impervious coverage if that driveway is ever built. Does that change any of your prior testimony?
No, it does not.
Any questions? Okay, that's your presentation.
Mr. Chairman,
right?
just two questions. With regard to the setbacks with the lots, in the front yard, I believe the ordinance also has a similar requirement where there has to be a certain, or maybe it's from RSIS, a certain setback from the building to the curb. And that's intended so that you have a driveway of a sufficient width so the car isn't hanging out into the private roadway. This application complies with that requirement?
I believe that it does, Scott. Yes, it does.
Okay. And then lastly, I think the requirement for the 20-foot requirement at the side, at the end of the building, I can't understand what that's even for. The requirement for the 20-foot rear, I can see there being a desire of the zoning rationale to have some setback in the rear, so there's some private
open
space
space to
behind
the
the
homeowner.
building. The variances in the rear, they basically range from 9 to 11 feet. Can you
Correct.
speak to whether that is a sufficient rear setback to allow for people to have some area in the back for their own enjoyment?
Yeah, I think based on the plan, there is some area back there, and there is area provided for a patio, as I recall. And I think that probably framed the amount in terms of how far back the lot line for the fee simple ownership was to go. But, I mean, Scott, is that accurate? You designed it, but that's kind of what I think the rationale is. Am I correct?
Behind each of these individual units, the dimensions of those patio spaces were determined by our client. We've set them up, and we basically set the rear line a couple of feet behind that patio space
Okay. So
to keep
each of
them all
those-
consistent.
And they're all on the fee simple lots?
Correct. Yes, they are.
Right, thank you.
So this is for people that want to put a patio back there? Is that what you're saying?
No,
Or
each
what-
unit will be built
will
with a
have a
patio,
patio.
yes. They will have a patio built for them.
And that calculations are in the?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, sir.
Okay, yeah, that's it.
That's all we have at this time.
Okay, first, we'll open to the public. This is your opportunity to ask questions and make a statement. So come up, we'll take your name and swear you in and let you go to it.
Could you raise your right hand? Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give should be the truth?
Yes, I do.
Your name and address, please.
John Janho, my address.
Speak right into the microphone.
My address is 67 McGuffey Road, Somerset, New Jersey. I own the property, the adjoining property at 127 Cedar Grove Lane. Forgive me, I prepared statement. I wanted to be clear about what I was saying. And also, I've heard some things tonight that I need to adjust to in real time. So, in an effort to be a good neighbor, I've had many discussions about this project with Steve Rubin, the owner of Kings Row Homes, and have cooperated by accommodating his need for water and sewer line easement through my property, which allows for a public sewer line via gravity, thereby providing significant savings to the developer and future residents. I've also agreed to an emergency access easement on my property to aid in the security and well-being for the future residents of the proposed development. As evidenced by my accommodation, I do not oppose the proposed development. However, in my conversations and in the subsequent legal agreements made with the developer, I've been very clear that central to this application and to my cooperation with this project is my family's ability to continue to operate our business at 127 Cedar Grove Lane as we have for nearly a century. In exchange for the easements granted, the developer, in a legal agreement, assumed full responsibility for the construction of a buffer system to attenuate any noise, dust, visual, screening objections from its future residents. Should the residents feel that this buffering is insufficient in the future, any additional buffering would be done on the neighbor's property at their expense. We have also agreed that the nature of our business and the agreement regarding the buffering system must be disclosed to all public residents in advance of their purchasing the property. My family has owned this property, and 4 generations have operated a business from this property since 1923. We welcome new neighbors, but we have no intention of changing the way we operate our business. Furthermore, the board's granting of approval for this development cannot change the town's expectation based on our functioning in the future. I've enjoyed a good relationship with the town. It's been a long time since we've had to have the town visit or have any disagreements. Having said that, Mr. Thomas, I very much appreciate your forthrightness related to the easement and what it's not really the southwest corner, but on the drawing, that's the way it was described. Not having any trees removed from it, I understand your concerns related to the residents. But I want to be very clear from my perspective that the intention of that easement is that should New Brunswick Road need to be realigned my plan was to use that easement to realign, to replace my driveway and like in kind, so they still had access to Cedar Grove Lane. So I agree with you that further discussion about this area and how it's going to be used is necessary prior to approval. And based on those discussions, I may have a very different position than I opened with. Thank you.
Can,
Anybody else? Okay, then we'll close. Oh, I'm sorry. One more at least.
Would you raise your right hand, please?
Yes.
Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give should be the truth?
Yes.
Can we have your name and address, please?
Susan Vanderbeek, 24 Emerald Place, Somerset, New Jersey.
Thank you.
I come here tonight with several of my neighbors. I guess to let you know, first off, we have many other neighbors who couldn't be here tonight, but who have signed these documents to let you know we're not necessarily in favor of the development. I do have a question. My first question is, what is the actual time frame to notify? So my husband and I did not receive the notification. Other neighbors did receive the notification. But I must say, being here tonight, it appears as though this is a very late notification. It seems as though this is almost baked. So I would like to understand what the process is for notification.
The state law says that the applicant has to notify property owners within 200 feet at least 10 days in advance of the hearing. Now, in this case, this was scheduled for October, so the applicant actually served notices back in September. At the October meeting, we knew that the matter would be adjourned, so we announced the new date at the October meeting, meaning that new notices did not need to be sent out.
Okay, that's helpful. I didn't know when the initial notice needed to be provided. I thought there would be a longer window of time, but that's helpful. I do have a couple of other questions and concerns, if I may bring those forward. I am wondering about parking for guests that are visiting this new community. Where is that parking going to be? Is it going to back up to the existing homes in our current development?
I think the engineer should answer that.
Yes. Mr. Turner?
In reference to the site plan.
All right, I'm going to flip back to A1. So the guest parking is accommodated by way of the 38 off-street parking spaces that are being provided inside this new development. Each of the townhouse units themselves, as I mentioned, will have garage space and driveways for their own cars. And then we are obligated to provide a half a space per unit per New Jersey residential site improvement standards for off-street parking, which is really what you would use for visitors and or guest spaces. That would require us to have 17 parking spaces off-street. We are at 38. So we believe we have more than enough off-street parking spaces to accommodate any visitors that would come to the
Can you point to the locations? I think she might be able to see it on the screen. Can you point, because the
Sure.
second part of the question was, where are they located in relation to the homes in the back?
Sure, yeah. So when you come in off of Cedar Grove Lane, you come up Road A, there's a cluster of off-street parking spaces down just below buildings number 1 and 8, the first two buildings you get to. And then you continue up northerly along Road A, and there's another cluster of 6 parking spaces between buildings 2 and 3 and 7 and 8. And then you get up to the T intersection with Road B, which is the road that's up inside the property and runs parallel with the rear property line. We have 11, we have 16 parking spaces located along Road B, which are in proximity to buildings 4, 5, 6, and they could also be used for buildings 3 and 7 if they're needed.
Could I trouble you to point out where the existing homes are on this schematic?
Sure. Are you in behind the development, or are you somewhere else?
Well, we're on Emerald Place, which is off of Crown Road, so Crown Road, and Domino.
Okay, Emerald Place.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest concern would really be for the neighbors who are on Domino Road.
Right, so Domino Road, these are the homes that are fronting on Domino Road. Okay, the Domino Road's sort of sitting up here.
Okay.
And then Emerald Place is sort of sitting up in the upper right corner off the sheet, a good bit distance away. They couldn't possibly, I think, park anywhere near Domino Place or Emerald Road and get to the development because there's no access from the back. Everything has to come from Cedar Grove Lane.
Right. I'm just concerned about the folks who, particularly, I guess I would say on Domino, are, their backyards are facing the rear of your development.
Sure.
And are they going to be looking at parking lot? I know you showed the schematic before.
Right.
With the burn or whatever we're calling that.
Right.
Where there'll be some trees, but are they going to be looking at a parking lot?
No, I can tell you they won't. I mean, the only real visible parking spaces would be the four that are on the northerly side of Road B that are located in between buildings 5 and 6. And they are filtered even and really screened by building number 6 because you could see the orientation of the existing homes on Domino Road. They're going to see that back building, not necessarily the parking lot. And by the time those buffer plantings grow, you'll barely even see the backs of those buildings, so they won't be seeing the parking.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Another, I think, very significant issue for many of us in the existing development is what is the impact going to be to the traffic, particularly on New Brunswick Road, which, as you know, runs right past us and is already a significant traffic issue, particularly, on a workday when the businesses on Davidson Avenue are letting out. And a lot of people are coming down to New Brunswick Road and then turning onto Cedar Grove Lane or continuing on the other part of New Brunswick Road. So I am interested to learn what was planned or how we planned for that.
Sure, and I'm not going to dive into traffic in testimony because I'm not a traffic engineer, but I can tell you on the engineering site plan what we've done, and I failed to mention this in my testimony, is on Cedar Grove Lane, we've gone through a review with Somerset County Planning and Engineering, and the obligation from them was to locate our new driveway intersection as far away from New Brunswick Road as we possibly could, which is why it's tucked all the way in the easterly corner of the site. And then what that allowed us to do is restripe a left turn lane, a dedicated left turn lane off of New Brunswick Road, or off of Cedar Grove Lane, excuse me, into the site. So that would avoid the backing up of traffic from anybody wanting to make the left into the development for people heading what I'll call eastbound on Cedar Grove Lane, if that's the direction they go. There's a dedicated left turn lane being installed.
Are we addressing the current sort of, bend in the road there that, that exists today?
I do know what you're talking about, and no, it's not part of our property. It's about 400 feet off of our property.
Okay.
No.
So we're still going to have that issue.
That's still going to be
Not
there,
necessarily
yes.
your issue, but an issue, I think, for the township is going to remain a challenge and perhaps become an even greater challenge because we're going to have additional housing in this very area. So I would suggest that might be something else that needs to be looked at. One of the other questions I also had is, what is the anticipated cost to purchase one of these townhomes? And I'm sure there's going to be a range, but do we have any sense for what the pricing looks like?
I don't know.
I'm not even sure that we have anything to do with that part of what you're asking. And tonight, this is basically a hearing about how this facility will function and what it'll look like. It's already approved.
I
And
understand that.
most of the issues, as far as the traffic goes, have already been dealt with in the use variance hearing.
Mr. Chairman, I think that, while the board can't, the value of the units is not something that the board can get into. I think indirectly the board does, though, in that The town requires the applicant to have a high-quality development in terms of the site layout, the landscaping. You had the presentation of the character of the buildings in terms of the overall look and design and the use of the varied materials and the roof lines, et cetera. So, again, this board can't say, not that you're suggesting it has to be 350,000 or over, but the board can and is making sure it's a high-quality development.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. And as you can, I'm sure, also well understand, for all of us existing homeowners, it's helpful to understand that it's going to be a desirable development. Ownership versus rental, which I know has already been addressed, is certainly important for us. So those are all the questions I have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else wish to speak?
Hi, I'm Sandra Bain. I live at 19 Domino Road.
Could you raise your right hand, please? Do you swear the testimony you're about to give should be the truth?
Sure.
Thank
Yes. I'm concerned about the buffer because I have also lived through the Jane Center construction, and we are still waiting for the buffer. The trees that were promised us to help block the view of the back of the Jane Center have not been planted. And I lost track of how many years the Jane Center has been there, but I think it's at least a decade. So when I see the renderings, they look beautiful. It's a beautiful job. But what kind of assurances do we in the World's Fair of Development have that that buffer is really going to happen? Because we haven't seen it with the Jane Center.
I can't speak to the other project, but this project plan shows those plantings. And if this board approves that design, then this applicant will be required to put those plantings in and bond for them in case they fail.
Okay. Another question I have about that is there's fencing on, if I understand correctly, there's fencing on what you're calling the west side?
Yes.
And there's fencing on the east side?
No fencing on the east side, just the west side
Just
to
the west
provide some
side.
screening from the landscape business.
Is there a reason why there's no fencing for us on the World's Fair side to, again, assist with a separation between that development and ours?
No, and I'll tell you, we didn't ignore it. We did talk about that, and myself and a landscape architect in my firm, and we spoke to our client about this as well. We don't like to obligate putting that fence in when we're dealing with buffers, a residential buffer to a residential buffer. It kind of, closes off the properties a little bit when you do that. We'd rather do it with the natural screening and the enhanced landscape materials and the natural berming that we can provide, rather than providing a solid board-on-board fence that would run down the property line and would basically cut you off from, something that you may not want to be cut off from. It's really just a big open area back there with natural vegetation and some new buffer planting. So we don't normally show or propose any fencing like that unless it's absolutely something that, the board would want us to do.
About how high is the berm?
It's relatively short. It's only about 3 or 4 foot tall, but we have plantings on top of that, and those plant materials will grow to be 30, 40 foot tall at the maturity.
Okay. And one last question I have, and I know you did a traffic study and all that good stuff, but I'm concerned about the traffic patterns because I live so close, and I know when I head down to the dentist and I need to make my left-hand turn into Cedar Grove Dental, there's that little left-hand turn lane, and that's great. But when I come out, I can't make a left-hand turn and continue on down to Easton Avenue. Is that going to be the same coming into this development? Will the people who live in the development be able to make a left-hand turn on the Cedar Grove Lane?
Yeah, right now the county has not restricted any movements out of this driveway, so it will be a full movement driveway. You will be able to, I'm not saying it's going to be easy at times, but you will be able to make lefts out of that development onto Cedar Grove Lane.
As a personal comment, and living on the street, I think in the morning and the afternoon, you're going to have a very difficult time. I don't care what the traffic experts say. 90% of the day, you won't have a problem. But everybody says it's okay. So, And in terms of the landscaping, we've had tremendous success, or do have tremendous success with projects like this, fulfilling their, or building according to the plan, having things work out the way they're supposed to. For some reason unknown, which I haven't given up on yet, the Jane Center is a poor example. It's a good example for your point of view, but it's virtually devoid of all landscaping. And that's not supposed to happen. It doesn't happen. That's a much older development. But I know what you're saying with that, and I haven't given up on, they do come in once in a while for approvals for things and do make some progress. But I don't think that will be, I think what you've seen tonight is what you will get.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Sandra? Sandra?
Spain.
That is your name, right? Yes. Okay. I'm thinking here, I'm just looking at this. The recreation area is close to those houses too. What's the board think about putting a condition on a fence back there too? Any opinions?
Fencing the recreation area, maybe?
Because the whole recreation is across the whole thing. You've got the garden area, and then you've got the, what is that, a tennis court or whatever it is?
It's just an open play area. It's an open grassed field area.
If we're really getting a 4-foot berm and we're really getting, how tall are the trees?
Well, they'll be 30 to 40 foot at maturity. I mean, not at planted height.
Okay.
And, the berm that you're going to see, I don't want to mislead you, is not across the entire length of that rear property. It is tucked in the northeast corner, which is really where the homes are. I'm not sure which home you live in back here, but that's kind of where we focused on that corner. We have it tucked in adjacent to that gas easement line. And then we've got plantings on top of that.
Mr. Turner, and just for the record, I think we had spoken about this before, but putting a fence in there would necessarily require fewer trees, correct? Because there wouldn't be enough space.
Yeah, it's always an issue of putting a fence in, then you restrict where you can put trees. We can do possibly a meandering fence, and allow us to keep some of the trees. On my honest opinion, I think the trees are going to be provide a better buffer and a screen. The fence, if you're sitting back there, you certainly will see the fence. But to me, it's in my opinion anyway, it's just a more natural look to have the berm and the plantings as opposed to having a physical solid fence running down the rear property line. But again, that's just my opinion.
What's the height of the trees at planting?
I'll let you know.
And the kind of trees too. What kind of trees are they?
Okay, next.
You swear the testimony you're about to give should be the truth.
Yes, sir.
Your name and address, please.
David Kovacs, 22 Domino Road. So I'm actually directly right behind this property here. And I mean directly behind it. So I see this tract of land here, and it's a very thin tract of land. And with all these houses in there, it just looks like it's, very cramped. And my concern here with these recreation areas are, they're at the back. And, there's always temptation of the kids that play in these recreation areas. I see you have a proposed easement, I guess in that northeast corner, the northwest corner there, that's going to run out like a access road. There's always that temptation for the kids, maybe to walk out there and traipse into our development, which is a very big concern. Also, an address to the traffic concern that Sandy brought up about if somebody has to go to work at 8:30 in the morning or 8 o'clock in the morning and try to make a left-hand turn, they're not going to be able to do that. They're going to have to make a right-hand turn onto the road for a little bit and loop around. You even said it yourself. Mr. Thomas, it's not going to be easy, during rush hour traffic. Yeah, sure, 90% of the time it'll be easy to do, but, during rush hour in the morning, it's not going to be. Also, as far as the lighting that's going to be provided, and I know that you said that you're going to try to make it to where there's no lighting pollution. Okay, so what about when the land is cleared? How long is the land going to be cleared before it's built upon? And how many units are going to be, built at first? Is it going to be 2 units and then like all the rest of it bare land, for people to walk back there and walk into our development? Is it going to be 3 units or are they all going to go up at once? And also the buffer, I think, that you talked about with that fence, only being 8 feet on the west and really not being in the back. Here's the view of my property with the trees. You can see it's full. Why can't we leave some of these trees here to give it the look that we don't know it's there until we tell somebody it's there? In other words, you can have the units there, sure, that that's all good, and just have that as a natural buffer. A fence would be nice, but if you don't want to put the fence, you can keep these trees there. I suggest the fence be put there so nobody gets the temptation to walk back in our woods. And especially with the Jane Center, I only want to touch on that a little bit. 5 years ago when I was at that hearing, they promised to put a fence up, and we still never got that fence, as Sandy also alluded to. So, and my neighbors Jack and Jean had to deal with, that debacle years ago with all the noise and the cutting and all that, and that's something that we probably have to put up with too, with all the building that's going to go on there. So this whole thing here with the buffer really concerns me, especially with that access road. Just the temptation of people wanting to come back in our development. Not only kids, but other people that want to walk back once the land is cleared. We've had a few break-ins over the years, from the other property, the Jane Center property. So that's my biggest concern here, and I hope that's all taken into consideration.
Okay, thank you. The access road is not going to be available to the general public.
No, it's emergency access only.
How will that be secured?
I do see it being chained off on either end with either a Knox box or a something that the emergency access person.
You can see it, or it will be?
It will be, yes,
Okay.
it will be. If that's what the fire official would like us to do, we'll work with him and do whatever he wants to keep it.
Typically what happens?
Sure, we'll do that.
Name and...
Name is George Bain. I'm at 19 Domino Road.
Would you raise your right hand? Do you swear the testimony you're about to give should be the truth?
Yes.
Thank you.
I'll make a formal request that you consider placing a fence along the back edge. The comment about the fact that the fence would require more trees to be taken down, in that rendering that you showed, there were no existing trees in that rendering. That was all new planting. It wasn't.
If I said I mean more trees coming from what we are proposing. So we will be able to put up fewer trees than what we were proposing, because the fence would obviously have to go there instead of taking trees down.
What I could say, listen, if the preference is to have a fence installed, I'm hearing no opposition. We'll put a fence up. We can certainly put that fence up. We will do something with the landscaping. We'll pull it away, and we'll still be able to maintain the buffer plantings, but that will be on our side of the fence, and the berm would be on our side of the fence as well. But we don't have any opposition to putting up the fence if that's the board and the neighbor's preference.
You can work the landscaping out with staff.
Right, we absolutely will. I'm sure Mr. Healy will make us do what's right.
I think that would be wonderful. And, I mean, I do believe that would be a deterrent to people. We don't want people cutting through your property to come through ours, because that's what happened with the Jane situation. So I think that would help deter that, and I think the presentation would be satisfying to us.
We'll agree to do that, and if the board's preference is maybe not as tall a fence at 8 foot high, as that is a pretty opposing fence. If you'd rather have a 6 foot high fence, you want a fence at 8 foot high, or would you rather have a 6 foot high?
6 foot high solid fence is kind of your typical screening fence.
Right, so we're gonna do 8-foot high along the Janho property, and then we'll do a 6-foot high in the rear, just so we know what's being asked of us.
With the berms?
With the berm, yes, the berm's gonna stay, yes.
Okay, thank you.
But just for the record, as we said, on that side of the property, the first thing you're going to see is the fence. The
Yes.
trees and the berm are going to be behind the fence.
Correct, and any vegetation that's on your properties, of course, won't be touched, so whatever's there will remain.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask staff a question? Mr. Healy, if our approval of the Jan Center it included a necessary buffer, why hasn't the town enforced that buffer if it hasn't been done?
I already have a to-do list here to check into that.
Because
don't
I
know.
understand the concern of these residents,
Yeah.
that if this developer agrees to a buffer and it's not done, you know, the past activity doesn't prove that we enforce our.
Yes, I have to look at it.
zoning
I have to see if it was on the, if the screening that was discussed was on their original site plan 15 years ago. I know they came about 5 years ago to do some solar, which I do not believe they've built. So it may not be there because they haven't done the solar project, but I need to look into that.
But 15 years ago is a long time.
Again, I have to look at, I wasn't here at that time. I don't know what was on the plans. I can dig them out of the files, the archives, find out what was on those plans, inspect the site and see if they were done.
And we also know.
And if we
there's
have an
a-
ability to enforce that, we will.
A notable absence of street trees along their property too, that
And that-
somehow they
that-
escaped planting.
That was an issue that we did look into, and that unfortunately wasn't on the approved site plans.
Anyway, this is not about beating up on the Jane Center. Is there any other member of the public wish to say anything?
I just want to close the loop, if I may. Mr. Hilly, you asked about the plant materials, and it's a mixture of plant materials, obviously, of flowering trees and evergreen trees, red cedar, junipers, Norway spruce, eastern redbuds. They are being planted anywhere between 7 to 8 foot tall to 9 to 10 foot tall. That's what we have specified. And we'll work with you, Mark, in terms of making sure that buffer in the back is sufficient.
All right, thank you.
Okay, then we will close to the public and wind up. Do you have anything you want to?
I don't have anything really substantial to add. I would just like to address Mr. Janho's comments real quick. I know he spoke about agreements that we made with respect to the fact that his business is going to continue operating the way it is, and putting all our residents on notice, and that is in the easement. That is going to be required in all our in our marketing materials to let them know that there is an operating business next door, and that's what they're buying into next door to them. And that's all I really wanted to say on that.
Okay, anything from the board? Before we come up with a resolution, we need a decision on fence that seemed to be moving in a direction. Put it across the back.
I'm in favor.
All right, is that something that we have to come to an agreement on the fence across the back, if we're going to require that or not?
Well, it seems like the public wants it.
I'd like to make it a condition.
Yeah, if they're willing to do it, I don't have any problem with that.
I would like to make that a condition also.
Now, from what I understand, it was 6 foot in the back and 8 foot along Janus side, correct?
The 8-foot fence along the Janho site is already on the plans.
It's already there.
Yes.
Oh.
That was part of our agreement with Janho to help with some screening from the business next door.
Any other comments? Anybody have want to offer a motion?
I'll take a stab at it. I'm going to need some help, though.
That's all right.
Okay, I'd like to make a motion to approve Kings Row Homes LLC, ZBA 16-00017. Do I need to read the whole thing? No. Okay. With the conditions of the reserved driveway, never to have a construction approved without an application. Impervious coverage at no more than 38%. 26 foot service road.
Well, we're basically granting all the variances.
All the variances?
All the variances contained in Mr. Healy's report.
Okay, all right. And then the 6-foot tall fence in the rear.
That would be a 6-foot solid fence along the rear.
What did I miss?
Does that cover it for everyone?
And just to clarify the impervious again, it's, the 35 is for what, I think it should state that it's 35% for what they're contemplating, and it's 38%, the additional 3% in case that additional, they can't develop at 38%. It's overall site with that driveway.
Okay.
That's understood.
Okay, any discussion? All the board?
Do you have a second on that?
I'll second it.
I thought he did second it. I'm pushing too fast. here.
Bruce McCracken,
Yes.
Alan Rich,
Yes.
Anthony Caldwell,
Yes.
Gary Rosenthal,
Yes.
Joel Reese, and Chairman Thomas.
Yes, I would be remiss if I didn't say it's been a long road, sometimes not always smooth, but I think we got to the right place. I think it's finally done right. I think it's a nice project, and I think you just raised the bar for development in the area. All right?
Thank you.
Next. New Singular Wireless LLC, ZBA 18-00011. D3 conditional use variance and site plan, which the applicant seeks approval for the placement of a 150-foot tall telecommunications tower in the rear of the property at 134 Copper Mine Road, Princeton, block 11.01, lot 60.01 in the RR5 zone. We say Princeton, that's the mailing address. It is Franklin Township. Why we're hearing it.
Mr. Quinn, can you just make sure all of your professionals sign in? They don't have to do it before they speak, just before they leave, if they could just all sign the paper. Thank you.
Love to. We'll take hopefully a 5-minute recess then. All right, we had before. Again, New Singular Wireless, ZBA 18-00011.
Great. Thank you for your time tonight. For the record, my name is Christopher Quinn, Quinn, here on behalf of the applicant, New Singular Wireless, PCS, LLC, whoever knows AT&T. The property, as you mentioned, it's 134 Copper Mine Road. It's block 11.01, lot 60.01. It's a 14.3 acre flag lot that's located in the rural residential RR5 zone. It's pretty much a heavily wooded area. AT&T is here tonight seeking approval to install a telecommunications monopole that would be disguised as a tree. You hear sometimes called a tree pole or a monopine, what they're called in the industry. It would be near the southeast corner of the property. With related equipment and a generator would be within a fenced-in compound. The pole itself and the antennas would be approximately 145 feet tall. With the tree branches that can seal the pole, you want them to go above so it looks more like a tree. That would be at approximately 150 feet tall. So we're seeking approval for a 150-foot tall facility. This will improve service in the southern portion of the community here. In terms of the ordinance says this use is conditionally permitted. It permits a tower in this location, provided you meet all the conditional use requirements. For this particular one, we don't meet 2 of the requirements, potentially 3. One of which is the setback. Your ordinance requires 2 times the tower height setback from the property line. This pole is approximately 65 feet from the closest property line. On one side, I think about 50 feet from the rear property. The rear property is open green space, green acre space, which is undeveloped and heavily wooded. The property to the south is heavily wooded as well, with the home about 700 feet away. So nowhere near anywhere would this ever be an issue in terms of visibility, in terms of safety or anything like that. In fact, what our planner will testify to is the simulations that he provided, that he went around the whole site, put a balloon up. He couldn't see the pole from anywhere else, except even right on our own property. It was very hard to even see in terms of this, because it's a pole that's being pretty much constructed and proposed right in the middle of a cluster of trees which is where you want to put this type of facility. And with all the heavy woods all around, it's really hard to, I don't think it'll be visible from anywhere in town. The other ordinance requirement that we don't meet is the landscaping requirement. Excuse me. In this case, we're not proposing to put bushes and trees around the fenced-in compound because there's already trees around the fenced-in compound, and you wouldn't see it anyway. So it really provides no benefit at all, and there's existing buffering. In terms of what we received in one of the review letters, it mentioned having overhead lines and overhead wires being proposed. Currently, there are some poles along our access driveway, the existing access driveway that goes back towards the property. What we'd seek approval for is to use those poles for our cable and telco, and they go underground for the rest of the way once we deviate from those lines. So to the extent that requires a variance, we'd ask for that variance as well. Again, no impact at all to the neighborhood. You can't see to the community. You can't see the lines anyway, and what's already there is existing. So we're not making anything worse. We're just using existing overhead poles and overhead lines, and then going underground when we can. In terms of witnesses, I have 3, potentially 4, if the board requires to hear from anyone. First, we have our civil engineer, Mr. Hanrahan. He'll talk about the design of the site. I have Mr. Panesso, who's our radio frequency engineer. He'll talk about why we're here for the site and what it's going to goal it would achieve. If there's any questions about emissions or compliance, we have the David Collins from Pinnacle, who prepared a report that we provided and submitted as part of this application. States the site's well underneath any of the federal and state standards, and in fact, that's even if you're right up against the pole. And this one's thousands of feet away from anywhere where people actually be, any of the public would be. And finally, we have our planner, Paul Rickey, to discuss the variances. If there's no other questions, we can proceed with our civil engineer.
Okay, we have the radio frequency report.
Yes, we have a radio frequency report as well as the emissions report.
Those are enclosed in the,
They've been, yeah, they were filed with our application. Okay, so I'll have our civil engineer, Mr. Hanrahan, testify.
I do. Joshua Hanrahan, that's Hanrahan, and I'm with Hammerland Engineering. It's 1707 Atlantic Avenue, Suite B2 in Manasquan, New Jersey.
Okay, can you give the board the benefit of your educational and professional background, please?
Yes, I have a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering from the University of Pittsburgh. I have over 14 years of design experience, and I'm licensed in the state of New Jersey for over 10 years.
Thank you. Your office was engaged to help prepare the plans that are submitted as part of this application?
Yes, that is correct.
And you have a mounted copy and electronic copy of those plans with you tonight?
Yes, that is right.
Okay, I'll ask you to, no changes have been made to them at all, correct?
The only thing that was made was the grass paver detail.
Okay.
Okay,
but that was the last plan that was submitted.
Nothing else has changed, yeah.
Okay, so what I'll ask you to do is to pull up the plans and ask you to describe for the board the existing property, what's where, the existing structures, the existing constraints on the property, and then what we're proposing.
Okay. The first plan that we have is Plan Z01 of the site plan set that shows the overall subject tract. This is a flag lot with a existing driveway coming off of Copper Mine Road. And the site is mostly wooded with a cleared area in the center of the property. There are some wetland pockets to the north and northeast of the property. There is also within the clearing in the center of the property, there's an existing septic field, shed, and some piles and a gravel drive that extends to that area. The site is within the RR5 residential zone, and there will be an installation of the monopine tower that Chris had referred to in this area to the southeast of the subject property. This will contain 12 antennas that are mounted to the monopine structure, 6 remote radio head devices, or 6 remote radio head units, and 2 GPS units. And there's also a generator and other ancillary equipment cabinets located within the fenced-in enclosure that'll be fenced in with a 7-foot chain link fence.
When you say remote radio head, I just try to let boards know this. It's a box that's located behind the antennas.
Yes, a box
so they're not
located
visible.
behind these antennas, which are...
Sir, you need to put the mic up to your face.
Yeah, sorry. A box that is located behind the antennas, which is also located behind the fiberglass branches of the monopine structure.
So in terms of the compound, you describe the size of the shelter, the size of the fenced-in area, and the setbacks of that area?
Mm-hmm. The shelter, the compound is a 21-foot by 21-foot square enclosure, and that is offset 50 feet from the side property line and the rear property line to the fence, and 51 feet from the rear property line to any equipment, and 53 feet from the side property line to any equipment. The setbacks to the monopine pole is 65 feet from the rear structure, from the rear property line here, and 64 feet from the side property line.
And why was this location selected instead of one that would comply with the 300-foot setback requirement?
Yes, this location was selected because this is the highest area of the site to give the best coverage for the coverage gap that they have to fill that in. And we also wanted to go into this area because these monopine structures want to be nestled into an existing wooded area. So that's why it's kind of tucked away into this southeast portion of the property. You got into the height already. Do you want me to clarify the antenna height, I guess?
Sure,
Yeah.
yes, please.
So
Go through that.
So the overall height of the structure is 150 feet, but it's 145 feet to the antenna and to the top of the pole itself. The extra 5 feet is for the branches, the fiberglass branches of the monopine structure. The pole itself will be a dark brown color, and these fiberglass branches will be a dark forest green, and the antennas can also be made to match that color as well. So it'll mimic a natural look, and also be screened by the existing wooded area. There is township properties to the north and east that are open space wood areas, and then the residential property to the south is also heavily wooded. And the reason that we feel that we can be within this closer than 300 feet for the fallback is because there are no existing structures located within 300 feet of this proposed location, and the closest residential structure is actually this home of the owner of this lot, which is several hundred feet away.
And the home that's on the property to the south, that's right up closer to Copper Mine Road,
Yes,
correct?
the existing residence to the south on this lot is over 700 feet away from the proposed monopine location.
I'm going to ask you to look at Z2 just to show the elevation view for the pole itself.
So this gives you a clear section view of the south elevation of the monopine structure. You can see this is to the top of the branches is 150 feet, and these are the antenna and remote radio head units located at the top at 145-foot height. And then down here you can see the profile of the walk-in cabinet and the generator, and there's also a meter bank located in that area as well.
Now, in terms of future co-locations, they would typically be located below the antennas.
Yeah, so there could be future carrier locations located below, which we could have 3 or 4 carriers on this, so they could be, a co-location on the same pole.
And in terms of what they need, they just industry standard, and to ensure there's no interference, they have to be set from center line of antennas to center line of the next carrier, 10 feet? About
10 feet, yeah. I would have to, refer to the RF consultant, but yes, that's.
So there would be plenty of space for other carriers to come in
Yes.
to utilize this facility?
Yes, that is right.
To minimize the number of towers in the area?
Mm-hmm.
Can we talk about the access and utility runs to the site? I mentioned them a little bit in my introduction, but I'd like you to go over for the board exactly what is required here and what kind of access driveway we're proposing.
Let me show plan SPO2.
Mark any of these?
No, this is all part of the.
Every single sheet was part of the plan.
All of these are part of the site plan set, yes. On SP2, you can see we are having a proposed grass paver driveway. This is a grass pave 2 system that can handle heavy truck loading, and delineated with markers. Every 50 feet we'll have fiberglass delineator posts, because this will blend in with the other, the surrounding grass areas. There's a turnaround at the end of the driveway, and also a parking area for a technician to when they visit the site.
And all of the access driveway, it's all located on our subject property, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And this is being done partially for the DNR Canal Commission. We are also removing.
Yes, there is, to meet stormwater management for this particular property, we are removing a pocket of gravel within the existing property, within the subject property, and then to offset these improvements for the enclosure. So there is actually a slight decrease in impervious and a decrease in runoff for the 2 and 10-year storms, and it's actually the same runoff for the 100-year storm. And we currently have an application submitted to the Delaware Raritan Canal Commission, and that's under review right now.
Now we're proposing a diesel fuel generator within our compound for this?
Yes, that's a 30 kilowatt, 300 gallon diesel generator, and that will be serviced as needed with fuel truck delivery.
And the fuel truck will be just like any other kind of truck that would access the site with the same exact access driveway?
Yes, that is correct.
In terms of the setback, is setback enough so that there would be no concerns with the noise generated from the generator?
Yes, so for the generator at a distance of 7 meters, which is roughly 22 or 23 feet, generates a decibel level of 69 decibels, but at the property line with the acoustic enclosure and the attenuation you get from the existing vegetation that's around, we will meet the requirements of the 50 decibels at the property line.
And 65 during testing will always be done as ordinance requirements during business hours?
Yes, testing will be done once a month for only 30 minutes and always during normal business hours, during daytime hours.
Okay, so it'll comply with all ordinance requirements.
Yes,
what about lighting proposed for this site? Is there anything on the pole itself?
Yeah, there is no lighting proposed on the pole itself or along the driveway. There are only floodlights proposed on the equipment itself, which will be on a timer. So when a maintenance crew does have to come out to the site, they'll just use that for that particular purpose when they're there, and the timer will automatically shut off when they're, when they have left the site.
And it's just like a regular floodlight, it'll have no impact on the neighbors?
Yeah, no impact to the neighbors.
I mentioned before during my introduction, we're not proposing any landscaping around this fenced-in compound, and we need a variance for that. Can you talk about the need for the landscaping here?
Yeah, that's touches on what I spoke about before. We have, tried to tuck this away in an existing wooded area. So there is already existing trees to the south of us. This is a heavily wooded area on this adjacent property. This is also wooded to the east and to the north of this. So we feel the existing vegetation will screen this enclosed compound and, the lower part of the pole itself.
And again, you mentioned some, what about tree removal? That was a question that was raised in one of the review letters. What kind of amount of tree removal would be required, and how would we compensate for that?
There will be 16 trees proposed to be removed, and we will provide more detailed plans to show that. And we will provide a contribution to the township tree fund for the replacement of those trees.
And this location actually has less tree removal than other locations that are within, that's a little bit further away to the north?
Yeah, if we were to move it further to the north, there would be more tree removal required, and there would be a lower elevation, which could affect the coverage of the tower. The highest point of this site is in this southeast corner. That's why we chose this location.
Okay. I'm going to ask you if it's appropriate now to go through the review letters we received from your professionals to see if there's any questions or information that we didn't answer yet that we can provide, or if we have any items that we can't comply with, we can talk about it then, if that's appropriate.
Can't comply with.
I think several of the questions were asking for information, so I think that's what it was asking about. So talking about number one, talks about the variance relief. I'm sorry, I'm reviewing the CME Associates October 19th review letter. Under general comments on page 2, items 1 and 2 and 3 we're talking about general information which we can comply with. 4 is talking about easements and exceptions which we can provide to the board and provide to its professionals. One thing I know that was raised before is that there is an access easement currently between what are the two lots?
Between lots 6101 and the subject the subject lot, which is lot 60.01. So the easement is actually in this area here.
In terms of site plan comments, we talked about, I think, number 5 talked about noise levels, which we discussed. 6 talked about noise as well, which we discussed. Site plan comments, number 1. Are there any bollards required for this generator?
There are not any bollards proposed. It is within the fenced-in enclosure, so we felt that was enough protection. That is something we can provide if the board, would require that, but, we feel it's not necessary.
We can add, we talked about tree replacement schedule, which we're going to provide. Adding the note about tree removal plan, that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
I'll let you run through the rest. Tell us if there's any concerns with any of the other items here.
The utility trench, we can definitely take that into consideration, and we were thinking of moving the utility trenching from, as Chris had stated, we're going to come off of the existing poles to the north of the existing driveway, and then come down to a new utility trench and go underground. And then instead of running right along the property line as the plans show now, we would run right along the edge of the proposed access drive, not have to clear as many trees, and would be, easier to access later as well.
So, but we would technically need relief for using the existing poles for telco and power that go to that point.
For the next point, we do have a slight decrease in impervious because of removing the gravel area, which is considered impervious coverage. As I stated, there is a decrease in runoff, stormwater runoff for the site.
Number 6 talks about the shed that's on the adjacent property.
Yes, so this is referring to an existing shed on the neighboring property 61.01, which is the owner of the subject lot, 60.01. So we would ask that he would not have to.
He actually said he would remove it. He said he would move it for us, so he'll comply with that requirement.
So,
there was a requirement from him back from 2015, so he'll comply.
Okay.
It talked about a cross-access easement, but there's one already in the title, which I mentioned before, so that's not necessary. And fire prevention official about grass pavers for emergency access vehicles. We can certainly comply with that as well.
Yes, that is right.
The other approvals you talked about, adding the details is fine. No other issues with anything else here?
Nope, no other issues.
Okay. With the planner letter,
Yeah, I think I can help you with that. I think most of my comments, I think we're going to hear from the planner and the RF.
Yes.
I think they can address that in their testimony. The one question, I believe you addressed this briefly. So you're going to use their existing poles for the electric and the telephone going down the driveway, and you're using that, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. And then it seems to run off the property.
That was an error on the plan. It should be on the other side of the driveway. Our trenching will be all on the subject property. Yeah.
Okay. And that power, those lines do run on the northern side of the driveway, so that will be corrected as well in the plan.
Got it. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, if there's other questions, we can answer them now, otherwise we can call.
Questions? The bollards, we kind of skipped over that. Should we think we need them or not?
What I would recommend is, I think that's kind of a technical thing. Usually with issues like that, both the planning board and the zoning board say, work it out with the engineer.
Okay, sounds good.
That's acceptable. I mean, we certainly can do it, it's just whether or not it's needed because it's within a fenced-in area already, but honestly, we can certainly accommodate if that's required.
Okay, next witness, I guess.
I'll call our radio frequency engineer, Mr. Daniel Panesso.
Yes, I do. First name Daniel, last name Panesso, P-E-N-E-S-S-O. Address is 299 Madison Avenue, Morristown, New Jersey. I have a Bachelor of Science in Electronic Engineering. I have been employed as a radio frequency engineer for over 20 years. I have testified throughout the state of New Jersey with regards to design and implementation of wireless networks such as this, and I'm responsible for the design of the site before the board tonight. And I have been accepted throughout the state of New Jersey and New York hundreds of times for applications such as this.
It's Mr. Panesso.
License for what he does?
There's no, there's not.
Okay, we accept him.
Mr. Panesso, the applicant's a licensed FCC carrier, is that correct?
That's correct.
And that requires them to provide adequate service in the area and region, correct?
That's correct, yes.
And you've prepared exhibits that have been submitted to the board that you have with you tonight that can show why the applicant needs a site here.
That's correct, yes.
And currently, right now, is there adequate service or is there inadequate service for AT&T in this?
Inadequate service in the area, yes.
And can you describe for the board, I guess, the exhibit you have, what you use to prepare it, and what all the colors demonstrate? And
sure.
I'll let you go from there. And again, this is exactly what you provided to the board.
So I'm going to refer to map number 1, which is AT&T neighboring coverage. This exhibit was prepared using an industry standard tool that's tuned for the area, utilizing the existing topography, morphology, as well as the existing sites within AT&T's network. The proposed location is represented by the purplish star approximately in the lower center of the map. The blue and green colors on the map depict the coverage being provided by the existing on-air sites, and the sites themselves are depicted by the green dots. The purplish blue color represents reliable in-building coverage, and the green represents reliable in-vehicle coverage. The area of white is the area of deficiency in coverage for AT&T's network, which we're trying to fulfill a portion of that with the proposed site before the board tonight. I can go through and list the existing on-air sites.
Is that in your report already?
It's in the, yes, I believe on one page we did have the immediate adjacent handoff sites.
Okay, so I don't know if the board wants to have him run through all the existing sites that are adjacent and neighboring here, or if it's just,
okay.
The report is already on record.
The report has been submitted with the application, which I outlined what sites were the handoff sites.
So can you just point to the site, subject site?
So the subject site is approximately in the lower center portion of the map.
Okay.
Which is here where I'm pointing to.
And then if you have, and again, green means in-vehicle coverage, adequate in-vehicle coverage, blue means adequate in-building coverage.
Correct, yes.
And if the site application were approved and you were able to have a site in this location as proposed, what would you have?
Yes, so flipping to map number 2, if the site were integrated and brought online into AT&T's network, the area of white that you saw on the previous map now gets fulfilled by this proposed location. And as was stated before, we designed the site because to maximize the footprint of coverage and to keep it in the elevation that it is because there is a drop in elevation as you move out of this portion of the property. We would not get the same footprint of coverage. And we need to hand off to, in order for this network to work, we need to hand off and seamlessly hand off to the existing on-air sites. So if we were to drop in height, meaning drop the antenna's elevation, we would get gaps in coverage and not be able to hand off to the site to the southwest and to the northeast, which is site W348, and then site M97. So the site that we're designing before you all tonight is the minimum height. I would have liked to go a little higher, but the minimum height required to meet this handoff is what is being proposed before the board tonight.
And again, the reason why we're in this location is because in this particular portion of the property, we're on a higher ridge level.
Right, the ground
And
elevation.
if we go away, again, it'll degrade your signal.
That's correct. The height decreases, yes, and then the signal will be less.
And are there any other tall structures in this area that you could use to put your antennas that would generate this type?
No, there is no other existing stalled structure in the area, in this search area, to mount the antennas.
And why is a tree type, like a tree-style monopole being proposed here as opposed to a flagless flagpole type of design?
Right, the monopine is being proposed because on a flag, if you use a flagpole, we have to stack the antennas, which means that the structure itself would have to become higher to get to get all of the antennas into that structure. We would have to create a taller structure. With the design that we currently have, we have all the antennas on a platform type structure, so we're able to get all of the different antennas that we need to have 4 antennas per sector, so that we can get all of our, we have licensed frequency band in various bands, so that we have the separation between those bands, so that we can have the coverage being provided for each sector, for each of the horizon, the 3 various portions of the horizon that we're going to be covering in that plane.
So in addition to that, it helps for future co-location as well?
In addition, it will help for future co-location as well, because if you have a flagless flagpole, they would also have to stack their antennas inside that pole. So you limit the amount of carriers as well in a flagless flagpole
So in
type
other
design.
words,
And we also thought that because of the fact that we have the trees, the existing trees, we can have the buffer of those trees to camouflage this pole.
So that's where I was going as well. It makes sense to put trees around trees instead of a flagpole in the middle of
Right,
trees.
or a standard monopole without the monopine design.
In terms of maintenance and being monitored, how is the station manned?
This is an unmanned facility. It's monitored remotely back to the central NOC center. It will not have any noise, odor, or glare or anything like that. It gets monitored back remotely. If there was an alarm with a piece of equipment, the switch gets the notification and a tech would be dispatched. And normally a technician goes out once a month with a standard SUV type vehicle to check on the site itself to make sure that everything is operating correctly.
Okay. And in terms of emissions and standards and all that, there was a report that was submitted as part of this application that said that we'll be about under 3% of what the federal standard is at the very maximum.
That's correct.
And again, the site's hundreds of feet away from any structure, where anyone is, so in reality, it'll be even less.
Right, it's well below the FCC compliance guidelines, which, state that a carrier could go up to 100%, and we're well below that.
Okay. I have no further questions for Mr. Panesso.
Anything from the board?
The FFA, with the light on top, how tall you have to be to have a light up there?
An FAA analysis would be run, but that depends on the flight path. So an FAA analysis would be run, but there is no lighting proposed for this site. There is no FAA issue with this site at the location and the height that it is being designed for.
I mean, typically, if you're over 200 feet, you always need a light.
Right, but
if you're below, it's a flight path. Yeah.
Right, but also it depends on where the structure is located, if there is a flight path in that area. Yeah.
Anybody else?
Now, I have Mr. Panesso testified about the emissions report. I have the person from the company that prepared that. If you want to hear him testify, he can say the exact thing Mr. Panesso just said, but I don't necessarily think it's necessary for the board, but we have him here available for you. Okay.
That report's on record?
Yes, it is on record. It's always submitted as part of the application.
Thank you.
Prepared by Pinnacle. No?
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Then I will call our planner, Mr. Paul Rickey.
Bless you. Do you swear that the testimony you're about to give should be the truth?
I do.
Your name and address, please.
It's Paul Ricky, R-I-C-C-I, 10 Georgian Drive, Clark, New Jersey.
Okay, Mr. Ricky, give the board the benefit of your educational and professional background, including any licenses you hold.
Sure. I'm a licensed professional planner in the state of New Jersey. I've been licensed since the year 2000. I'm also a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr.
Do you have an opinion with respect to the variances being requested by the applicant here?
I do.
And part of that's going to be based upon the visual impact and photo simulations that you performed?
That is correct.
Okay, I'll let you run through this. And again, these simulations have been provided with the application package. They're already on file with the board.
Yes.
So we don't need to mark them, and all you have tonight and what we're presenting is exactly what the board has already as part of the application package.
Okay. Not to be overly repetitive, but this is a largely compliant application with your zone plan. We are a conditional use, and as the board is aware, when we don't meet all the conditions of a conditional use, we still have to demonstrate our D3 variance proofs. However, the fact that we are a conditional use lends itself that the use itself is appropriate in this area of the township. I will state from a general standpoint before I go into my testimony that I did personally fly a balloon. That was the basis for the simulations that you're going to see this evening. I canvassed the area for approximately 2 hours. I could not detect the balloon outside of this property, and I had difficulty, as indicated by our attorney, actually even viewing it on the property. So not to sound overly dramatic or the like, but this may be the best cell tower site that I've seen in terms of from a visual impact and the ability to see the tower from anywhere around. I just wanted to state that for the record, and I'm under oath when I state that. Regarding the variance proofs, again, I mean, I reviewed your planner's letter. It's gone into great detail to this extent. We're requiring the side yards and rear yard setbacks of 65 feet and 64 feet to the pole, where twice the height of the tower is proposed. I just also want to mention the exhibit that we have here in the aerial photo simulation key location map, 138 Cupper Mine Road, W1097. This was submitted as part of the package. And we have that being displayed visually as well. The site is outlined in orange, and the blue, those are the dots where the pictures were taken. The red dot is the tower location. And you can see from the aerial, from the tower, that this site is completely surrounded by woodlands. I know from reviewing your preserved open space map, and by the way, you guys seem to be doing a pretty good job with preserving open space based upon my review of it. The two rear lots and the multiple lots around it, those are all township preserved open space. And then you can see the lot, and I must have been having a bad day. North is actually down here rather than up. So if you're looking in the southerly direction, you can see a very long lot that has some improvements along its frontage. But just to give an idea of scale, the width of this lot is about 500 feet. So you have, well over maybe a few thousand feet to the rear of this lot where we're proposing to place against it. So it's really no reason to ever really develop back there and the like. So we feel that the location is about as good as it comes. So even if this tower, okay, part of the variance relief and the reason based on your planner's memo for those setback requirements are aesthetics, and I'm going to go through that in a moment, and safety. And we feel confident at this location, even if this tower did come down, and these towers we know really don't come down, there will be no safety impact as a result of it as well. But getting into the proofs of the application, I mean, I do note that we do know that the issuance of an FCC license generally establishes the use promotes the public good. And I also would point out, as part of, even under a D1 use variance, that this application is particularly well suited based upon the radio frequency engineer, that this being the lowest height needed to provide the service, and the fact that if its remote location from a land use planning standpoint is as good as it comes in a district that prohibits this use on a conditional basis nonetheless. Regarding the negative criteria, we know for wireless telecommunication applications that we are largely applying the SECA test. And for a conditional use variance, I'll apply that SECA test within the negative criteria here as well. Number one, we know identify the public interest at stake. I think we know that family interactions, the ability to have access to prompt, reliable information. We know that over 50% of individuals use wireless telecommunications as their primary source of a telephone use today, and I can go on and on. Regarding the second prong is identify potential negative impacts, and I've partially identified those. Number one, this is a passive use, right? Doesn't create population, traffic with the exception of a monthly maintenance visit. Doesn't create demand on sewer, water, population. We've already shown that from a noise perspective, when that generator kicks on, we can meet the state noise requirements. The only potential negative impact for wireless telecommunications facilities is the visual impact. And we submitted the visual impact study, and that is dated May 16th, 2018, and it's entitled Photographic Simulations, Proposed AT&T Wireless Telecommunications Facility, Site ID W1097, 138 Copper Mine Road, Franklin, New Jersey. And I apologize for saying that quickly. And again, I think the board has seen this before. The simulations, the aerial correspond with the simulations. Show 5 simulated, attempted to show 5 simulations. View number 1, from the property, 480 feet approximately west of the site, okay? And that is located in the, we'll call it the flag portion of the lot. And you can see even at this distance, I had to step back approximately 480 feet because at this point, the vantage point of the trees, otherwise when you're closer, you're looking up. And at this point, you can just see a portion of the monopine through the trees. At all the other locations, and I showed pictures of these locations, so I can go through these one by one if you find it to be necessary, but there's no visibility here. It's as good as it gets. It's an excellent location for a wireless telecommunications facility if the concern is the visual impact of that facility from surrounding properties. And because it's not visible, we do meet at least one objective of your wireless ordinance, that the goal is to hide the visibility of these towers from your streetscape, other residential properties, and the like. So I think the finding is that there would be no negative visual impact associated with this facility. And the third part of the test asks us whether we can mitigate any impact. And I think the reason that we're proposing the monopine is because it's an ordinance requirement, but even if that even if it was a true monopole, you wouldn't see it nonetheless. So it's kind of belt and suspenders, for lack of a better word here, proposing the monopine. But clearly a monopine in an environment that's surrounded by trees is an ideal situation where, from a planning perspective, I think it works well. It's not a situation where you show a pole by itself and it kind of sticks out. So we think it works well. And the fourth part of the test asks us to identify or to balance the benefits versus the detriments. I think I've clearly shown that the benefits associated with this facility, the public need for this facility, outweigh the detriments, which I believe in this case are really none. And for these reasons, I think this application clearly meets the burden for the D3 conditional use variance.
Any board questions?
Can you imagine?
Open to the public. Is there anyone who wants to make a statement? Anybody coming forward? Close. You want to say anything?
Sure, I just want to make sure we addressed all the concerns or questions in Mr. Healy's letter.
I believe you did. So I think to summarize your visual analysis, you put up a balloon, drove around for 2 hours to see if it was visible from anywhere, and the only place it was visible was at a certain angle on the site.
Correct.
Yeah, I'm looking at the locations and it looked like you chose, I guess even though they weren't visible, you chose some site because it's the end of a cul-de-sac. There's another site where there's an open field, so maybe it could be visible there. Some of the homes that are on Copper Mine nearby, and again, from all those locations, nothing was visible.
No, and I shoot the height with a rangefinder, and when I came back, on 3 occasions, I came back to check the balloon. Every time it was, within 2 feet of the design height. I fly it to 150, I shoot it to the bottom. Technically, I'm showing this at more closer to 153 to the top of the balloon. So
It looks like the photos were perhaps taken early spring.
they were taken in May, right around the date of the photo simulation. So it would have been within a week or 2 of that May date.
So that there's like little buds on the trees, but not fully leafed yet.
I can
It's
confirm,
going by
yes.
going by your photo. So, okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, that's the extent of our direct testimony.
Board discussion?
What's
Anyone
done,
wanna- Go ahead.
what's done with the tower when you're done with it?
Our agreement requires that we remove it, the tower itself, up to the ground. And your ordinance also imposes a performance obligation on us to do that as well.
Oh, okay.
Anything else? Anybody have a motion? Second?
I'll second.
Discussion, poll the board.
Bruce McCracken,
Yes.
Alan Rich,
Yes.
Anthony Caldwell,
Yes.
Gary Rosenthal,
Yes.
Joel Reese, Chairman Thomas.
Yes.
Great, thank you very much for your time tonight.
That's the
I appreciate it, I appreciate you hearing us
easiest
this late.
cell phone application we've ever had.
Big zero. It's amazing, isn't it?
So move, motion to adjourn.
Yes. In a Valley Richmond.